Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Uh-oh. At just over 1 year old, my daughter Josephine didn't say much, but she had a few expressions that she used regularly. Uh-oh was one of them. She would use it when her unsteady legs would fail her and she would wipe out, or when she would sling oatmeal onto the floor after a botched attempt to scoop it onto her spoon. The expression made me smile, even when I had a mess to clean. To my frustration, she had another expression that was not so appealing. Ghost. The first time she said it, she was lying on her change table while I changed her dirty diaper. She generally flailed around like a wild animal, but she was strangely calm that night, simply sucking her thumb and staring up, her gaze directed into the upper corner of her room. "Honey, what are you looking at?" I asked, smiling. She pointed a small finger up to the corner. "Mama, ghost." I knew it made no sense, but I was afraid to look. However, I had to reassure her that it was nothing. After a short, internal pep talk, I sheepishly glanced up into the corner. There was nothing there, obviously. "See, honey, there's nothing to be afraid of. There's no ghost." I was ashamed of myself for even thinking twice about it. My sister Charlotte was right. My ex-husband changed me. Dave was overbearing and aggressive, and he would undermine me constantly. 2 weeks after Josephine was born, he had his bags packed, chastising me on his way out the door. I could still remember the last thing he said to me. "Abby, you wanted this kid, not me. You forced me into it, so now you're gonna deal with it yourself." Charlotte was a hand on my shoulder after it happened, and surprisingly, often a logical counter to my illogical thoughts. Dave was wrong for me in every way. But sometimes, we can't see it. Or, in my case, don't want to see it. Unfortunately, even though he had been gone for over a year, his impact on my psyche lingered. Once confident and bold, I was a shell of that person. The preposterous thought of a ghost hiding in the corner of my daughter's room had me averting my gaze. From that night on, Josephine would point that little finger at the exact same spot, and I would hesitantly play the role of defender and reassure her there was no ghost. I reasoned that she must have picked something up from one of those spooky kids videos I let her watch on the tablet. Or maybe it was an imaginary friend. Lots of kids had imaginary friends. Josephine didn't stop pointing at that corner. It went on and on, every night.
"So your daughter sees ghosts, huh?"
I scowled at Charlotte. She had flown in from the West Coast to stay with me for the week. She wanted to help with Josephine as much as she could, including putting her to bed. I should have made up some excuse to do it myself, but Charlotte would have sensed something was wrong. She was good at that. "It's nothing, Char."
You know, this is the exact type of behavior that makes these types of things persist. I mean, this tendency for people to ignore anything that makes them uncomfortable is...
Okay, fine. I held up my hands, trying to avoid one of her lectures. "What do you want to know?"
How long has she been doing this?
"About a month."
Does she always point to the same spot?
"Yes."
Have you seen anything strange?
I paused, just for a moment before answering. "No." Stupid. She caught my hesitation. Charlotte glared at me. There had been a few oddities, sure, but they were easily explained away and nothing that Charlotte had to know about. Had I awoken to a sound from Josephine's room one night and, glancing at the video baby monitor, believed that I'd seen something or someone leaning over her crib? Yes, but I blinked and it was gone. That could easily be chalked up to the fog of sleep, the poor picture quality of the monitor, and too many horror movies before bed. On another occasion, had I thought I felt a hand brush through my hair as I was placing Josephine in her crib? Yes, I had. But again, I was living alone for the first time in my life, with a young baby to look after because my husband had just abandoned me. My fragile mind was playing tricks on me. I looked back at Charlotte. So? I asked.
You probably have a trapped spirit in there,
Charlotte said. Come on. Charlotte gave me a look I had seen before, one of concern and distress. Her voice was soft and sincere.
I care about you and Josephine. I'm just telling you what I think. I know you sometimes shrug me off and think I'm a nut, and look, frankly, sometimes I don't blame you. But this time, it really feels like something. I sensed a presence.
Well, I wasn't going to fight back now. So what do I do? I asked.
Spirits are typically people who have passed on and got, well, stuck in our plane of existence. I mean, most are just innocent observers. You can be sure, though, that all of them are confused, and they can become dangerous if they aren't handled properly.
Are the Ghostbusters busy, you think? She ignored my poor attempt at humor.
Most spirits don't understand where they are. This could be the spirit of, say, a mother who left behind a child and believes Josephine is her daughter. I mean, maybe she sees you as a threat.
So what do I do?
The only way to get rid of a spirit is to confront it and demand that it leave.
I laughed. Demand that it leave.
Well, people are scared to confront the unknown, so spirits can linger for years. You have to make it understand that it doesn't belong here.
I shook my head. I can't even see this so-called spirit. Not sure how I'm supposed to confront it. She shrugged.
The mind of a child is so different than that of an adult. Funny enough, Josephine even recognizes this thing as a ghost rather than how it appears to her, likely as a human. She has no fear, but she certainly sees and acknowledges it. I mean, adults believe that ghosts aren't real because they don't fit into our rational view of the world. I guess you just have to think with a little less rationality.
I took a deep breath. This is crazy, Char.
A few years ago, you would have marched up to that room and yelled at that corner just to shut me up.
Charlotte said, grinning a bit. You mean before Dave?
Of course I do.
Charlotte replied.
He's gone now, so I want to see some of that old Abby spark again.
The next night, Charlotte stayed at my parents' place. She insisted on Josephine staying there with her. She could tell I needed a break. It was a Friday night, and a few of my college friends were getting together for some drinks. I indulged, really, for the first time since I'd gotten pregnant with Josephine. After 5 hours at the table exchanging nostalgic tales of wild nights and downing pitchers of beer like we used to, I was surprised I was able to spit out my address coherently enough that the cabbie could get me home. After stumbling through the door, I went to the fridge and grabbed an old bottle of white wine that had probably been sitting there since the day I moved into the house. It had been a good night, and I didn't want it to end. Even if I was just there alone, ready to pass out watching some garbage movie on TV. Before I crashed down on the couch, a thought struck me. Tonight was a good night, but I could make it a great night if I did something more. Something big. I turned from the inviting couch and marched up the stairs. Throwing the door open to my daughter's bedroom, I flopped down into the rocking chair across from her change table. The unusually bright moonlight beamed through her open curtains. I could see the corner where the so-called ghost resided very clearly. Flinging an accusatory finger at the corner, I took a big swig of cheap wine before making my slurred statement. "All right, you asshole. I'm here now. Come on out. Show yourself." I laughed as I took another deep gulp of wine. "Come on, don't be scared. Come out, wherever you are." There was a change at that moment. The room got eerily cold. My hair drifted across my face, as if a window was suddenly opened and the cold winter air had filled the small bedroom. Pushing the hair from my face, I recoiled in shock. There was a woman in the room with me. Her position defied all logic. She faced me, pressed into the upper corner of the room, palms and feet pushed against the wall as if they were stuck there, holding her up in the air in this bizarre position. A long, torn white dress hung from her emaciated figure. Strands of filthy black hair hung across her face. She was pale, almost a gray color. Her skin looked as if it was peeling away from her wrinkled face. She glared at me, her eyes cloudy white. No pupils. She bared her teeth, or what was left of them, and made a hissing sound, like a snake. Paralyzed and feeling lightheaded, I tried to focus on my breathing. Finally, I was able to spit out something. What do you want?" I wasn't sure how or if she would respond, but the creature opened her mouth, a seemingly endless, dark void exposed. She spoke, her voice otherworldly. Gripping the bottle in my hand, I found my legs and stood. No, she's my daughter. The ghost hissed loudly and repeated, "My child." She looked like she was preparing to leap off the wall at me. I took a step towards her, Charlotte's words ringing in my head. "No, you don't belong here," I shouted, tightening my grip on the wine bottle still in my hand, shuffling with nervous, angry energy. The ghostly woman started to push herself away from the corner. Moment of truth. "Get the hell out of my house!" I screamed. I wound up like a baseball pitcher, closed my eyes, and threw the wine bottle as hard as I could. Smash! I opened my eyes to see nothing. The woman was gone. The room felt warm again. The only evidence of the encounter, a pile of glass on the change table and a hole in the now wet drywall. I sat back in the chair, dazed, and stared out the hole in the wall for what must have been hours. Eventually, sleep overtook me. I didn't tell anyone what had transpired that night, not even Charlotte. I treated Josephine's room like a quarantine zone for the next week. She slept with me, and the door to her room remained shut. After a week of waking up with Josephine's legs resting across my face, I thought it was time to move her back into her bedroom. Not just because I needed sleep, because I wanted to believe that there was nothing to be afraid of, that we had beaten it. I watched the monitor like a hawk the first night, and all was calm. On the second night, again, all seemed well. I began to drift off to sleep when I was shocked back into consciousness by a shrieking cry. Flinging the covers aside, I bolted to Josephine's room, faster than I had moved my entire life. I barreled through the door with such violence that I heard the sound of splitting wood from somewhere on the doorframe. Snatching Josephine up from her crib, I held her as tightly as I could while I moved to turn the lights on. "What's wrong, honey?" I pleaded for an answer despite her limited vocabulary. After a week of sleeping with me, maybe she just panicked when she had a brief wake-up in the night and saw that she was alone. Then Josephine raised her arm, and a small finger pointed up at the corner. That corner. Slowly, I looked up in the direction of her finger. "Uh-oh," she said. The breath that I'd been holding escaped. "Hole," Josephine said. The tension drained from my body. Tears welled up in my eyes. "Yes, honey," I said with a smile. "Mommy made the hole in the wall. Mommy made that uh-oh." I patched up the wall a few days later. For a long time, I waited for Josephine to look up there, to point and tell me the ghost was back. But she never did. Those first few months after it happened were incredibly tense, but I was ready. If anything came back, if anything threatened her, I would be there. I knew that I wouldn't be able to protect her from everything in this world as she grew up. I couldn't protect her from heartbreak, from loss, from all the challenges she would face. But I knew that if I could confront the ghost in the corner, that we would be able to confront everything else life would bring head on.
At first, I didn't think anything of it. My neighbor would stop to chat with me, leash in hand, and I would catch glimpses of the metal slider dangling from its belly. I assumed it was wearing a piece of pet clothing, or that perhaps it was the byproduct of some awkward veterinarian procedure. But the more we chatted, and the more I saw this mysterious zipper, the more I realized it was out of the ordinary. Clearly embedded in the dog's skin. It drew my attention every time we engaged in small talk, until finally one day I decided to ask about it. "Say, what is that zipper for on the little guy's belly, anyway?" "Oh, that? It's a long story. I wouldn't want to bore you. I've got nothing but time." I wondered if she could see the beads of sweat forming above my brow. "Really, it's nothing, just a safety measure." And that was it. She pretty much laughed it off, granting me little in the way of an explanation. Thinking back, her responses were downright vague and deflective. She could see how curious I was, so why not just tell me? And what exactly did she mean by safety measure? As unfruitful as our conversation was, I didn't press the matter any further. Days, weeks, months went by. I'd occasionally see the dog's strange cosmetic feature, but I brushed it off every time, knowing it would only haunt me if I dwelled on it. Still, the thought itched in the back of my mind. It wasn't until a few months had passed that I would finally have the nerve to scratch it. I was pulling up weeds along my fence when I looked over at my neighbor's place, noticing the dog lying on the back porch. A stray cat wandered by, as often happened in our neighborhood. Without so much as a warning growl or malicious stance, the dog trotted over to the cat and scarfed it down, the sound of sharp teeth colliding with bone. The cat screeched in agony until it was no more. In a minute flat, its entire body was devoured. I was in shock. The cat's cries alerted my neighbor to the situation. She raced outside, grabbed the dog by the collar, and pulled him into the house. Through the sliding door, it was tough to make out, but I swear she unzipped him and reached inside, seemingly adjusting one of its organs. He didn't flinch, not even a bit. After pulling her arm out, The dog dropped to the floor, dead as a doornail from the looks of it. She then carried him outside and placed him back on the porch, arranging him in a sleeping position before getting in her car and leaving for the day. This 5-minute span of visual information was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. Words like gruesome, strange, and horrific are too tame to describe what I saw. I was appalled beyond measure. After the shock wore off, I hopped the fence and approached the dog's carcass. I felt its neck, cold to the touch, no pulse. I looked to its underside, and there was that God-forsaken zipper in all of its mysterious glory. I felt kind of bad for the dog dying, but I had to know what that damn thing was there for. I needed an explanation for not only the dog's, but my neighbor's odd behavior just moments ago. I slowly unzipped the dog's belly, placating my curiosity with the satisfying sound of metal sliding across metal. I spread each side of the opening with both hands and peered in, divulging the animal's inner workings. What I saw was absolutely dumbfounding. My neighbor's dog was animatronic. There was wiring, gears, a tank where its stomach should have been, the whole 9 yards. It didn't make any sense, but there it was, staring me back from the zipper. After scurrying home in shock, I decided that my best course of action would be to call animal control. I could tell them that my neighbor's dog trespassed on my lawn and was attacking the neighborhood cats. They would show up, examine the robotic carcass, and then go from there. I knew there wasn't a protocol for that sort of thing, but I assumed they could take care of things and contact the appropriate people, whether it be the police, the government, or the National Enquirer. As long as this weird predicament was taken care of, I could sleep easy knowing that my neighbor's strange robot dog wasn't going around eating whatever it pleased. Simple, right? Nope. Far from it. Animal control took a while to get there. By the time they arrived, my neighbor had come home and disposed of the evidence, hiding the dog somewhere in her home. The animal control officer apologized for the misunderstanding and left, leaving my neighbor on her front porch, glaring in my direction. It appeared privacy meant nothing to the local authorities. Just by luck. The days that followed were different. My neighbor's dog had sprung to life, reactivated by its master, no doubt. They would walk their usual path around the cul-de-sac, but would not stop for small talk. I knew her dirty little secret, after all. I was no longer a friendly neighbor to be conversed with. Oh, no. I was the enemy, a danger to this woman's unusual way of life. Even if I meant no harm to her or her strange choice of pet, she didn't seem to see it that way. She continued to give me the cold shoulder for about a month and a half before finally speaking with me again on one of her daily strolls. "Hey there." "Hello, everything all right?" "Just peachy. I'm having a cookout on Saturday at noon. You're more than welcome to come." Strange. We weren't on speaking terms for over a month, and now I was suddenly invited over? Maybe this was her extending an olive branch my way, her way of saying, "No hard feelings." "Yeah, sure, I can make it. Sounds like a good time." "Great, I'll add you to the list." As she walked away, I felt the need to apologize, even if her dog was a weird cat-eating robot. "Hey, about that animal control call, I just wanted to say, oh, don't worry about it. Water under the bridge. See you Saturday." She hurried off, and that was that. Problem solved. Or so I thought. The night before the cookout, I couldn't sleep. Kept on hearing what sounded like footsteps creeping around the perimeter of my house. Every time I got up to investigate, the sound ceased, and the coast appeared to be clear. It was either a prank at my expense, a burglar taking their sweet time to pull the trigger, or ghosts roaming around in the night. Either way, it left me anxious, making sleep a distant dream, just out of my reach. During a particularly loud set of footsteps, I raced downstairs, just in time to catch 4 glowing dots peering in through my living room window. This was enough to make my neck hairs stand upright. Though terrified, I wasted no time grabbing a ball bat and storming out my front door to greet the would-be intruders. I may be old, but I can still kick some ass when needed, especially when it involves crossing my property line. To my astonishment, my yard was empty. I covered every side of the house, only to find no one, not a soul in sight in any direction I looked. I don't care how fast you can sprint. Nobody could have made it out of eyeshot in such a short period of time, even in those low-light conditions. Baffled and even more anxious than before, I locked up every last door and window in my home before crawling under the covers like a frightened child, scared of the mystery figures lurking in the shadows. The footsteps dissipated over the course of the night, and as the sun came up over the horizon, so too did my fear. My waking nightmare had ended, but not before putting a weary, sleep-deprived frame of mind in its place. In a sluggish slur of movement, I grudgingly made my way to my neighbor's house around noon, ready as I would ever be for the neighborhood get-together. Oddly enough, there were no cars in the driveway aside from my own. I wondered if I got the date wrong, but after knocking on the door, she greeted me with a smile and rushed me into the house. We exchanged pleasantries, and she sat me down at the bar stool in the kitchen. After a few moments of awkward silence, I mustered up the courage to ask about the elephant in the room. "So, where is everybody?" "You're already here, silly." I tilted my head, puzzled. "What about everyone else?" "There is no one else. You're the only person I invited." All at once, pieces clicked into place. I felt stupid for not realizing it sooner. Her sudden kindness, the noises the night before. There was no cookout. There was never any cookout. I was in the middle of a trap, lured in largely due to my own idiocy. I should have guessed that something sinister was going on the moment I unzipped that dog. "So, what happens now?" I asked. "Oh, you'll see. Just sit tight." I quickly jumped up from my chair and turned towards the door. With inhuman speed, she bolted in front of me, a large kitchen knife in hand. "Not so fast." I stood there, still as stone, intimidated by her fluid motions and firm stance. "We need to talk." "About what?" I knew exactly what. Don't play dumb with me. And that's when I noticed it. On her chest, peeking through the top of her blouse, I would have missed it had the sunlight coming through the window not danced across its metal. She had a zipper, too. Stricken to my core with fear, my gaze was interrupted by an angry hand gesture. My eyes are up here. The moments that ensued are a bit fuzzy, but I can only guess that I was knocked out or chloroformed, as I awoke strapped to a chair in a new room. Given the staircase, I assumed it was her basement, though this realization didn't help me any. I attempted to break free of my restraints, but it was no use. Unless she freed me herself, I was fastened to that chair for life. In absence of mobility, I decided to give the place a once-over. The staircase was to my left and a concrete wall to my right, but directly in front of me was a workstation, complete with a dozen computers. This is where my neighbor sat, a USB cord snaking out of her unzipped chest, typing away at a blinding rate. Her motives were still unclear to me. Though confined to the one view, I was able to turn my neck enough in both directions to form a decent picture of what was behind me. It was a wall of cages, each housing an identical copy of her dog. They didn't move, even in the slightest, likely just as animatronic as she was. What on God's green earth had I stumbled into? Just then my neighbor ripped the cord from her chest and walked over to me. "Ah, good. You're awake. Did you have a nice nap?" I refused to reply, looking her up and down in disgust, trying to make out what this thing was that was speaking to me. "What's the matter? Dog got your tongue?" I remained silent in lieu of her taunting me. "That's all right. You just need to listen. Sit tight. I'll be right back." She walked over to her workstation and grabbed something before reclaiming her spot in front of me. "I've worked too hard in this location to have you screwing things up on me. Then again, it's my own fault. I was careless. I never should have left my core on the porch like that." I assumed she was talking about the dog. "I want you to look at this." She placed the object at eye level. It was a badge of sorts, upon which was a logo that read, Syntheti-Tech. I'm an android. I work for a large company, moving from location to location, gathering specific information that's crucial to our initiative. You can't know anything beyond that. Hell, you already know too much. I hadn't noticed it at first, but she seemed to be playing with her zipper. God, I'm so sick of this fucking meat suit. Before my very eyes, she removed her clothing and unzipped herself down to the groin. In the most unnatural way possible, she slid out of her own skin, revealing to me her true form. She was nothing but a pile of electronics, pieced together in a human shape. It was a strange sight, nauseating in every sense of the word. The way she moved and spoke while like this was downright sickening. I can't say any more, but I want you to know that our work is necessary. If you were to speak these truths to the world above, you would be jeopardizing everything we've accomplished. You have to submit to our intentions and see that they are just. I didn't know what to make of this. I simply looked away, wishing not to see her grotesque animatronic face any longer. Unfortunately for me, she grabbed it and forced it in her direction anyway, feeling of cold metal enveloping my jaw. "You need to promise me that you will submit. You're not to tell anyone of any of this. Do you understand?" I nodded in agreement, but only because I wanted her hand off my face. Luckily, she let go and backed away. "Good. You know, we're not so bad when you get to know us. In a sense, we're just like you." Internally, I scoffed at the thought of this. I was nothing like her, and not just because of her appearance. I was never one to go around kidnapping my neighbors, holding them captive in my basement. It just wasn't my cup of tea. Well, this is it. I'll need you to take over from here. Don't make the same mistake I did, lest you regret it for the rest of your life. This was the last thing she said to me, though I had no idea what any of it meant. I must have been knocked unconscious again, because the next thing I remember was waking up on our basement floor, no longer bound by my restraints. For one reason or another, she didn't kill me. I was a free man. Without warning, a group of trained operatives burst through the basement door and raced down to help me up. "Are you all right?" "Yes, I'm fine. What's going on?" I noticed a few of the men walk on opposite sides of the room to gather evidence. One guy ripped open a cage, grabbed one of the dogs, and unzipped him, revealing it to be nothing but a hollow carcass. "They're empty, sir, a collection of shells." Just as I suspected. No matter. Load them into the truck with the hard drives. Hopefully she didn't wipe them before she left. I must have looked completely bewildered because the gentleman grabbed me by the shoulders and looked me straight in the eye. "Everything's fine now. We've been on this woman's tail for a long time. We may not have captured her, but this is still a big win. And it's all thanks to you." I was still confused, but more so relieved that it was all over. Are you sure you're all right? Don't need a ride to the hospital? I shook my head, not wishing to be poked and prodded after what I'd endured. I didn't trust doctors much anyway. I just wanted to go home. Okay, let me walk you to your house. I agreed, and we were off. I couldn't wait to get inside and put the whole ordeal behind me. That was the plan, anyway. Whatever government officials they were, the entire crew picked the place clean and left my neighborhood within a couple of hours. That night I received a call from them for a statement regarding the situation. I obliged and asked some questions myself. Though the information was privileged, I guilted them into giving me some details, claiming I needed some peace of mind so I could sleep at night. The fact that I was just a frail old man helped too. It would seem my neighbor was a high-ranking disciple in an android cult hell-bent on infiltrating various government agencies. They were currently in the process of recruiting new members to aid in their cause. That's all I was told, which was more than I thought I'd get. This was enough to placate my curiosity and keep me from dwelling on events as they unfolded. I thanked the man on the other end and hung up, content with my feelings. After the ending of the call, I heard a knock at my front door. I don't usually get visitors late at night, but I suspected it would be one of my neighbors asking about the sting operation that just took place next door. I opened the door, and to my surprise, there was no person there to greet me. Nope, not a person. Instead, there was a dog, identical to my neighbor's. Before I could process its arrival, it trotted inside and sat on the floor. A voice then emanated from its collar. "Shut the door." I did as the dog said, baffled and afraid. "Hello. I'm serial number 724234. I'll be your core companion on your journey of fulfillment. True adventure awaits. Would you like to begin your first task?" I didn't know how to respond or what in God's name was happening, but it was at this point I felt an itch running up the length of my torso. It was subtle at first, but grew to the point that I had to reach down my shirt and scratch at it. That's when I felt a familiar metal caress my fingers. It took a moment for it to sink in, but I knew exactly what I was feeling. It was a zipper.
The day started as any other, waking up, getting into my uniform, and letting the dogs outside before leaving. Grabbing my tools and meter on the way out the door to greet another glorious day. I placed my tools into my company work van, fired it up, and headed out to start my route. I had several jobs on my list that were pretty simple, some inside wiring repair, and some customer education calls. No big deal, really. About 30-minute jobs, in and out. Pretty easy. Then I received a job that was a little further out of the city limits than usual. About 45 minutes away, to be more precise. I remember thinking, oh great, way out in the boonies, and it's a trouble call with no notes on the work order. This could literally be anything. I started my drive headed northeast out of town. Nice sunny day in May and about 70 degrees outside. Perfect weather for a cable guy anyways. I had my cooler next to me in the passenger seat filled to the brim with snacks and cold bottles of water for my day. The drive was actually pretty pleasant. Saw some beautiful scenery and a few babbling creeks along the way. Finally approaching the address on my GPS, I noticed that it was a pretty long driveway. At least 800 feet or so from the road. Turning onto the long, narrow drive with cornfields on each side, the house came into view. The house was a 2-story older farmhouse, probably built back in the late 1800s or so. cobblestone foundation, and a dirt turnaround up near the house's entrance. I shifted my van into park and climbed out, retrieving my tools from the rear cargo area. I walked up the 3 or 4 steps leading up onto a wraparound porch. I prepared myself to greet the customer, and as soon as I went to knock on the door swung open. Hello, I'm Henry, your cable technician for today.
Oh, hello. Nice to meet you.
Boisterously spoken by the short, thin-framed elderly lady standing on the other side of the threshold. Good afternoon, ma'am. Would you be willing to tell me a little bit about what's going on today? I said, while looking around at the various antiques that were hung all over the walls.
Well, I'll tell you. We have 3 cable boxes in this house, and 2 that are on this floor work perfectly fine. But my husband told me several times that the one in the basement is displaying odd images from time to time.
I paused. Odd images?
My husband told me that he was down there working at his workbench, and the program he was watching suddenly went black, and there were faint images on the screen that he couldn't quite make out. And then, all of a sudden, the program returned like nothing had happened.
Oh, okay, ma'am. Well, how often does he notice this happening?
He said at least 2 or 3 times a week, usually later on in the evening.
All right. Well, would you mind showing me the box?
Well, sure, but I usually don't go down there because of my arthritis. But if you go down there and turn to the left, you'll see the television down there. And right under it is the box. Be careful now. This is an old house, so the ceiling in the basement is pretty low.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I'll go take a look at it. I ventured down into the darkness of the basement, feeling around on the walls for a light switch and finally getting some light down there. I noticed that as I climbed down the stairs, it was getting cooler and cooler. These older homes with the cobblestone foundations usually were this way, being a mostly dirt floor. The fluorescent lights hummed as I walked to the other side of the basement, locating the television and the box. I set up my meter and hooked it to the cable and took a few measurements. Now on my meter it will display a signature of the downstream signal, and if the signature is fairly straight, then there may not be many problems with the cable line. This particular job, though, the signature was straight until about halfway where there was a deep canyon in the signature, showing that some of the channels are getting lost. I assumed that there was maybe a part in the cable that was chewed by mice or other rodents. Could be a bad bend in the cable, possibly even a bad fitting or a loose connection somewhere. I started tracing the line, and it went across the room against the wall and underneath an old wooden door in the opposite side of the room. I attempted to open the door. However, there was a padlock on it. Well then, gonna have to see if she has the key, I said to myself as I made my way back up the steep wooden staircase. Ma'am, there's a door that I might need open that has a lock on it. You wouldn't happen to have the key for that, would you?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that you needed in there. One moment, please.
The lady's face paled a little bit when I asked about the keys, and as she turned away, I thought I saw a slight expression of worry in her face. The lady was gone for about 5 minutes, and I had thought that I had heard a muffled and slightly heated conversation from the opposite side of the house.
Here's the key,
she said while handing me an old rusty key.
My husband usually doesn't go in that room unless absolutely needed. It's so dark and musty in there. Just Whatever you do, try not to touch much in there. My husband told the original installation technician to just leave him a certain length of cable, and that he would run the cable himself through that room.
No problem, ma'am. It shouldn't take very long, I said as I was once again descending the rickety wooden staircase. I walked over to the locked door and unlocked the padlock. It took a few wiggles for the key to work due to non-frequent use. The hinges on the door were pretty loud and stiff. Pulling on the door with a bit of strength, it finally gave way and opened. As I was opening the door, I saw a picture hanging just to the right side of the door. It was a young girl, maybe early teens, smiling happily for the school photo camera, with the name Emily on a gold plaque underneath. Finally getting the door all the way open, I took out my flashlight and had my first look inside. Clouds of dust filled the air and slowly settled. At first my eyes were adjusting to the dim 20-watt bulb hanging about halfway through the room. And at first I thought I had seen a good number of boxes stacked up on the edges of the room, but slowly realized it was furniture. There was a twin-size bed with a faded pink bed set, a small chest of drawers, a night table, and a little stand on the other side with another television on it. The television was an older one because it had the turn knobs on the front of the TV, you know, like the TVs that you actually had to get up and walk across the room to change the channel and volume. For a moment, I got lost in the creepiness of the room. Dirt floors and child toys stuffed in an old wooden milk crate. The place looked like it had about 30-plus years of dust on everything. Finally, I came to the realization that I was on a job and needed to get refocused. So I walked to the far right side of the room and kept tracking the cable. The cable ended up being connected to a small AB switch that sat on top of the television, and then another cable coming back out of the switch and continuing to the far back portion of the room, up the wall, in the corner, and finally to the outside demarcation point. That's a fancy word for the place where the cable connects to the main hardline outside of the house. At this point, I was examining the exit hole in which the cable itself went through to make sure there wasn't any scarring or chafing on the cable, when suddenly I felt this strange static on the back of my neck and arms. The hairs on my arm and neck were standing straight up, and I felt a slight chill go up my spine. Overwhelmed with the sensation, I quickly turned around to find that the television had been switched on, and that white and black fuzzy snow displayed on the screen. Okay, what in the hell is going on here? I walked over to the television and switched it off, figuring that it was probably due to some faulty wiring in the TV itself due to its age. However, when I switched the TV off, I felt the static again, rising up my spine just as before, only it was paired with that feeling that someone else was near and watching. Once again, I turned towards the door, and there in the small door frame stood a burly, ragged-looking older man. "Oh, hello, sir. You must be the husband?" He didn't answer, just stood there. After a few seconds, he slowly took a few steps in my direction, and I stood up unsure of the vibe he was giving off.
This is my daughter's room. I thought my wife had asked you not to touch anything. It's been a long time since I myself have even been in here.
"I am terribly sorry, sir. The television turned on, and I thought maybe it was faulty wiring. I only turned it back off. I apologize," I said, feeling a little uneasy about the situation.
We don't mess with things in here. It's what Emily wants,
he explained with somewhat of an emphatic growl. Once again, sir, I truly apologize. I won't touch anything other than this cable here." I was beginning to understand the sentimentality of the request. Of course, after losing someone that you love unconditionally, you want to hold on to as much as you can. But then I thought again about what the man said. It's what Emily wants. Wait, what did he mean by wants? I thought. The word wants implies that she's still here. How could that be possible? The only sign of human presence in there was my fingertips dug into 30-plus years of dust on the television knob. I started to feel a bit more uneasy as the older man started walking towards the twin bed in the corner.
This is where she wanted to be. You see, she always liked the cold. She didn't like staying upstairs with us. She needed to be in the dark and cool air. Kept telling us that she couldn't sleep and whatnot. So I set her up down here. She was only 13 at the time, and her mother didn't like it too well with her being in this cool, damp cellar. Yeah, but Emily wouldn't have it any other way.
He said that, looking around the room with a grim look on his face. Oh, okay, I see, is all that I could muster up to say. The old man continued.
Yeah, and a few months went by down there in her room, and she kept complaining about wind or some type of whispering. She wanted a television down here, and that way she could get to sleep on account of the whispering noises. I always chalked it up to being wind outside whistling and howling through the night. Yeah. So I set her up with this TV down here, and then we didn't hardly see her for the next several months, except for maybe dinner and bathroom trips. Now, always sitting in her room watching the TV. Sometimes I'd come down and the TV would just be static and no shows on, only to find her sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of the damn thing. So finally I told her that she ought to get her up out of her room every now and then, you know. Join the family. Yeah.
I found myself completely engulfed in the story, forgetting sometimes that I was at work. I turned to the man, and his eyes were filling up with tears. So I asked a question that I probably shouldn't have. So, where is she then? Emily, I mean. I waited a few seconds for the man to recollect his composure. Then he spoke.
Well, a few months passed, and we kept seeing less and less of her. Always down in the basement. So finally we had enough of the nonsense and moved her back upstairs with us. She was not happy about that. No, sir. Not at all. So I kept catching her going down to that room and turning on this air TV. So I thought, well, enough is enough. I padlocked this air door, that way she couldn't get back in there. Yeah. Bought her new things for her room upstairs. Left this room the way it was. It wasn't until a few months later that she up and disappeared on us. We looked all around and couldn't find her. After about 6 weeks of her missing, well, the local law had to give up on the search. But I just knew there was something we wasn't missing. So a couple of weeks after that, I brought out our old vacuum down here to tinker with it. And then I noticed an odd smell in this here basement. So I walked around trying to find where it was coming from. and I stopped dead in my tracks when I got close to that door there. Yeah. Some type of black slime was round the top of the door, and flies was crawling in and out the holes there. So I went up and got the key and opened the door. Yeah, and that's when I found her, sitting in front of that TV, stone cold dead.
I looked at the man, and the dam of tears had finally broken. Tears fell to each side of his face as he recounted the horrible tragedy that took place here. All of a sudden, I felt embarrassed and ashamed, instead of creeped out or uneasy. The pain was evident in the man's face as I turned away from him and looked at the television. Then something caught my eye. A dark stain on the dirt floor about 4 feet away from the TV. It was about a foot or so deep and about 2 feet wide.
Yeah, right there's where she was, where I found my baby girl. I leapt out of that room and ran upstairs to the telephone and dialed 911. But I knew it was far too late for that. Needed to at least inform the law that she had been found. 1982 was a dark year for us. Yeah.
I stood there, completely frozen and in awe of the man's story. I'm so sorry for your loss. I couldn't even imagine experiencing something like that, let alone live it.
Yeah, well, that was about a lifetime ago. 39 years since, to be exact. My wife won't never come down here either. Keeps making stuff up like her arthritis. But I know she ain't got a lick of arthritis in them hips. Just another excuse. Just can't handle the memory, I suppose.
I mean, I can understand that. You know, not wanting to see it or relive the experience, I replied. I then came to the realization that it had been about an hour since I stepped foot into this home. I'm sorry, sir, but I may need to disconnect the AB switch from this feed line. I feel like maybe that switch has gone bad, I said, trying to get my focus back on my work.
Well, I suppose if it needs to be done, then go ahead. But I don't want much else messed with.
Yes, sir. Just planned on putting a barrel in this line and straight lining it to your box there.
Okay, I suppose.
The old man slowly turned and started walking towards the door as I disconnected the AB switch. The very moment that the cable released itself from the switch, there was an immensely loud static fuzz emanating from the television, as it once again turned on by itself. The man spun around after freezing in his tracks, searching frantically for the source of this horrendously loud noise. I was jolted out of my skin as I dropped the switch and cable hitting the floor in a loud clank. Quickly, the man ran over to where I was and leaned over the television, staring deeply into the screen.
Well, that's strange. What in the hell?
What? What is it?
These are the same pictures that show up on the other TV.
I turned, facing the television, looking to see what the man was seeing. It looked like several figures barely visible, about 5 or 6 of them standing in a semicircle. There was also a faint silhouette of something in the middle of the circle. It was pretty hard to make sense of due to the static on the television being so heavy. I decided I was going to check the other television for the images. Quickly moving from this room to the open basement, I rushed to the other television and switched it on. Nothing. Regular programming continued as scheduled on this television. Switching this TV off, I walked back into the small room. Now, this is when the story gets even more strange. I walked into the room only to find it empty. The old man that had been leaning on the old television just moments ago was nowhere to be seen. The crackling image on the television started to clear ever so slightly that I could make out more of the images on the screen. There were in fact now 7 silhouettes standing in the semicircle with the same silhouette in the center. What in the hell is going on here? Sir! Sir! Where'd you go? I was yelling for the old man that had been there just moments ago. And just then there seemed to be a slight noise I heard emanating from the television. The closer I listened, the more it started to sound like chanting. I couldn't make out the words, but it almost sounded Gregorian. I watched the images on the television slowly come into more focus. This cannot be possible. What in the hell am I seeing here? I said, looking at the screen intently. The old man was now on the screen, standing with a dark cloak, chanting along with the others in this ancient Gregorian dialect. This has to be some kind of joke, I thought, as I watched a group of chanters slowly envelop the mass in the center. One of the beings reached out its hand to the mass and pulled up something. The image became a bit brighter, and what I saw, I will never forget. Lumped there in the center of that circle was a lady who looked familiar. She looked pale and worn, easily a lady of her mid-50s. As the being pulled her face towards the light, my mind flashed back to the picture on the wall outside of that rickety door. Emily, I thought. As soon as I had realized what I was seeing on this television, I grabbed my tools and hightailed it out of the basement. Upon reaching the top of the steps, I was met with a younger woman standing in the kitchen. Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. I was just...
Let me guess. Fixing Emily's television?
The woman interrupted. Well, yes, ma'am. I just needed to get some fresh air. I'm just going to step outside for a few minutes.
Wait,
she yelled to get my attention before walking out of the door.
Did my mother call you out here?
As I turned around, I saw the old lady sitting in a rocking chair and humming an old hymn. She didn't so much as make eye contact with me at this time. Yes, ma'am, she did. I received a call this morning. It said there was a television having issues in the basement, I responded.
What all did she tell you?
The lady asked. Well, ma'am, she told me she didn't know much about the issues, but she told me that her husband is always complaining about the signal down there.
My name is Bridget, sir. I'm so sorry for this, but her husband, my father, has been dead for about 10 years now.
She told me with a sorrowful look on her face. Wait, what? How? I just saw him down there. I heard her talking to him in the other room. But what are you saying? I was frantically searching for explanations.
What do you mean you saw him? Sir, I'm just going to let you in on something. You see, my mother, Anne, she has dementia at 74 years of age and can barely recall her breakfast in the mornings. And that door down there? Yeah, she doesn't go near it because she can't walk up and down the stairs. There's a reason that there is a padlock on the door. No one is to come in or out of that room.
In or out, ma'am?
In or out. That door has been sealed since 1982. No one went in there but Daddy. He started to go crazy with the black mold spores down there. And the police ended up telling us that he was the one who had killed my sister Emily in a hysteria fit. They called it a temporary case of psychosis. He suffocated her down in that room after catching her in there once after locking the door. That's why no one has been down there since.
Well, the door needs to be padlocked again. I just got out of there and needed the air, so I...
You left it open?
Bridget yelled. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that I was done here yet, I retorted. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I turned slowly to look at the old lady, and she was smiling at me.
Did you fix it?
The old lady asked. Yes, ma'am, it's fixed. The younger woman then walked over to me and told me that I didn't need to do any further work.
I'm sorry for your trouble, sir. Please leave for your safety. Have a good rest of your day,
Bridget said. Yes, ma'am. You too. I turned back towards the door, and just before closing it all the way, I heard Anne speak to Bridget.
Would you like to go watch some television downstairs?
The door latch clicked, and I was once again drowned in the noise of wind and birds. I walked away from the home, only looking back once. I jumped back into my van and started to drive off. I finished my day out, and a couple of hours later, I found myself sitting down on my couch, relaxing with a nice cold beer in my hand. Well, I guess I'll turn the TV on. Hope there's something good on one of these stations. I turned on the TV, and a chill ran up my spine. Static. Just static.
I once knew a man who was afraid of nothing. No monstrosity, man-made or fictitious, could subdue his spirits, and the mere mention of the word supernatural would elicit a most cynical laugh. This bravery was both his greatest strength and his most profound weakness, for ignorance and heedlessness can often be disguised as a deep and foolhardy sense of courage. He was to learn the limits of his bravery under the earth, down in those oppressive tunnels deep below the streets of Amsterdam. His name was Henke, due mainly to his Finnish ancestry on his father's side, and although his parents had passed away at an early age, he believed with conviction that his courage came from them. It was a matter of pride, a connection to the family he had lost, and it was this, above all else, which drove him into places and situations where others feared to tread. I had met him 4 years earlier, while traveling with some friends on a common rite of passage, backpacking through Europe during a university break. He and a few of his friends were on a similar adventure and happened to be staying at the same youth hostel in Rome. Both groups got along well, but it was with Henke that I struck up an immediate rapport. He was a keen musician. Like him, I was, at the time, still filled with self-promise. Or should I say, delusion of stardom through my own musical pursuits. Our friendship grew over the subsequent years, mostly via email, swapping musical discoveries, talking about politics, and generally getting to know each other as best two people can through simple correspondence. Traveling was also a must for both of us due to work commitments. On the odd occasion, we would find ourselves in the same country and enjoyed meeting up for a few laughs. And of course, he always knew which local pub served the tastiest beer, as well as which restaurants to best avoid. It was 11 months ago that I visited Henke in Amsterdam. The Dutch city seemed to be a good fit for him, as he always liked to live in the liveliest of places. The countless meandering canals, bridges, and walkways, swamped by the footsteps of a million tourists each year, appealed to his love of vibrancy and history. Amsterdam had seen many a traumatic occurrence since its inception, right up to and including the Second World War. Henke found himself in the city as he had been recently hired to carry out important maintenance work on the Rijksmuseum, one of Amsterdam's most impressive buildings. When I met him in a small, darkened corner of a local pub, well away from the burgeoning tourist trade, I was shocked by his appearance. Here was a friend I knew as being larger than life and exuding bravado, and yet what I saw was a shell of a man, slight in stature, racked with self-doubt. His sunken, anxious gaze worried me, and so I did my best to provide a kind ear to ease his burden. Among the murmurs of fellow drinkers nearby from that darkened corner of the pub, he began to tell me of the events which had led to his precarious condition. What he told me then, I will tell you now. Hanky had been working as a civil engineer for some time and relished the challenge of renovating the Rijksmuseum, a building with a long and compelling history. The museum housed Amsterdam's finest collection of historical relics, and being given access to some of its more hidden places, which were inaccessible to the general public, piqued his fascination for the obscured and unique. He had been hired to lead a maintenance crew assigned to assess and repair the building's foundations. This oldest part of the structure dated back centuries and had a most bizarre and, it must be said, quite horrific history. The Rijksmuseum itself had been constructed in 1885, but it had been built on top of an earlier structure which possessed a much older and unusual past. I knew immediately that this would appeal to Hanky, as he often spoke of the fond memories he had as a child, exploring vacant buildings, passageways, and caves near where he grew up. As a child, he loved nothing more than to lead his friends into places they would otherwise have avoided. The dark held no fear for him, nothing but the promise of hidden secrets and the opportunity to show his bravery to those around him. In the bowels of the museum, under its marble floors and deep red brickwork, lay a labyrinth of abandoned tunnels which at one time served as part of the old city's sewer network. They had long been disused and fallen into disrepair, but they were nonetheless an essential part of the building's foundations and had to be assessed and repaired. If not, the entire structure would be in danger of subsiding. The ground and upper levels of the museum were beautiful, displaying many wonderful historical relics from all over the world. On his first day on the job, Hanky wandered around the artifacts before starting his shift, especially interested in the war exhibition. Gas masks, uniforms, bullets, and dog tags of soldiers bloodied and forgotten all populated the sealed glass display cabinets. A group of children ran after their mother nearby, laughing and pointing at the weapons on show, imitating the sounds of explosions and gunfire. Families moved in regimented fashion from hall to hall, room to room, some talking about the violent history on display, others involved in more important conversations, such as which dinosaur toy to get from the gift shop. So bright, welcoming, and warm was the atmosphere of the building that it was difficult to imagine the darkness which festered below. After some quick words with the building manager, Hanky proceeded to an old, seldom-used room at the back of the museum. It housed an antiquated cage-like elevator covered in rust which was used by the maintenance crews to access the lower levels and sewers underneath. Pulling on a pair of dirt-covered yellow overalls, complete with hard hat and headlamp, he entered the elevator for his first descent. Pressing a cracked button, the elevator creaked into life and chugged slowly downward on a rattling chain and squeaky pulley. As the elevator delved deeper towards the abandoned sewers, Hanky thought to himself that those of a nervous disposition might have let such a dank and isolated place prey on their minds. This may have explained why the previous man in charge of the repairs had left so abruptly, citing nervous exhaustion and refusing to so much as set foot in those pitch-black corridors of cold stone ever again. The elevator winch and engine stuttered as it lowered Hanky down 4 levels into the basement. With each passing floor, he observed a slight dimming of the lights, and each subterranean level appeared more sparse and stone-like than the one before. A rusted plate attached to the elevator betrayed its age. It struck Hanky that the year of its construction, 1932, must have been among the last periods of maintenance carried out there before the occupation of the Nazi army. He knew much of the shameful history of the region as he was part Jewish, and his great-grandfather had died during the Holocaust. Many had fled to Amsterdam for sanctuary from the Nazi regime in the early 1930s, but the long, blighting arm of Hitler's horrific final solution eventually reached the borders of the Netherlands, sweeping many thousands away to those shameful and barbaric concentration camps. With a shudder, the elevator ground to a halt, and, after forcing the grated sliding door aside, Hanky disembarked. The old sewer tunnels spread out before him and were curious in construction, steeped in a history which stretched back much farther into the distant past than that of the museum itself. Having spoken to his employers, he had been specifically told to pay heed to the assessment and repair crew's knowledge of the tunnel layout, as the place could be disorienting. The lighting system required to illuminate the maintenance work had not been fully installed yet. His new employers, up above in cushy office buildings miles away, seemed unusually concerned that he would find it all too easy to get lost down there. Most importantly, he was informed that the two-way radios, normally used to communicate between team members when underground, had been acting up, and that they were unreliable due to interference, probably produced by nearby metallic deposits in the ground. This meant that when interference made communication impossible, he and his crew could only communicate verbally or by using light from their torches to convey simple messages via Morse code. This was particularly useful in longer tunnels, as a crew person's yells would often echo and contort in such a way as to be almost unintelligible. In any case, it struck Henke that the catacombs below really were isolated and lonely places, even more so with intermittent communication to the world above. Care would have to be taken, but he did feel a nostalgic sense of excitement for a hidden world begging to be explored, like all those days spent looking for adventure as a child. After standing in the small bricked elevator room waiting to meet his new colleagues, Henke was glad to finally see another person. Jones, second in command of the maintenance crew, appeared from around a corner, whistling to himself while his headlight bobbed and weaved to the sound of feet through inches of stagnant water. Heavy-set and rosy-cheeked with a wide grin which had told 1,000 jokes, Jones was the type of person Henke instantly knew he would enjoy working alongside. After a few pleasantries, Jones debriefed Henke on the current progress being made, informing him that the initial mapping and assessments of the tunnels had gone well. All in all, there were 16 four-people repair crews, each of which was assigned a section of the sewers. Henke would oversee the entire operation, but he knew that he would need to directly supervise 2 of the crews working in one of the more isolated tunnels. The walls there were in precarious condition, and if they were not careful, a cave-in could occur. It was his priority to make sure that did not happen. After walking for 15 minutes, both men arrived at the section of tunnels which would be Henke's focus for the next few months. The sound of occasional drilling could be heard in the distance as the workers continued to install the still non-operational lighting system. As the 4-person crew assigned to that vicinity would be working further away from the other crews, it had been decided that they would have their lighting installed last. Henke did not like this due to some of the crumbling brickwork which was already visible to him. The idea of a crew drilling only by the light of their headlamps when the work required a delicate hand made Henke cautious. He was brave, but not reckless with the lives of his colleagues. He made a mental note to prioritize the lighting installation in that section to lower the risks to his team. Each passageway seemed oddly shaped, with no 2 tunnels being quite alike. That entire section of the sewer was so antiquated that it had been built long before the careful planning of such constructions had become commonplace. One tunnel would arch forward for over several hundred meters in a strange semicircle, while others bisected it at right angles, carrying on in a regimented straight line into the darkness. Henke even found a passageway that seemed to dip and rise only to slither its way along in an unnatural S-shape. Some tunnels seemed to go on forever. Others stopped abruptly as if the original builders had been unable to complete their work, leaving in a hurry. Jones tried to keep the conversation light, and, with a man's experience of walking through the tunnels for the previous 2 months, Henke was glad to have a guide to show him the way. Waiting in a large alcove was the 4-man team assigned to that area. They would work that section of the tunnels during the day, while the other shift would take over later, working through the night. Jones introduced each of them. They seemed nice enough, but Henke was surprised to find the men largely in the grip of silence. In such jobs, humor was normally found in abundance, with repair crews using it to slice through the monotony of working in such cramped and repetitive conditions. Here, though, he found them uttering not one word beyond a monotone greeting. Sitting in silence in that imposing alcove, removed from any consideration of camaraderie or fellowship, the only inference that they were not a collection of subterranean statues was the occasional movement of their headlamps, altering the shadows around them. They seemed wholly disconnected from, not just each other, but the very environment in which they worked. Henkei brushed this feeling of unease aside and committed himself to cultivating conversation. If these men were in some way angry or uncomfortable with one another, then he would soon lay that to rest. A happy workforce is a productive one. The first order of business was to survey that section of tunnels and decide where repairs were most pressing. Preliminary assessments had already been made, but Henkei liked to evaluate any repair project he was involved in personally. He walked the catacombs with his team and noticed immediately that they were still on edge, that they seemed frightened in an almost childlike way. No amount of questions, casual or otherwise, could elicit anything other than one-word broken replies. Slowly, they toured the winding grid of tunnels, lighting their way with the small torches attached to their safety helmets while taking notes about failing walls, water damage, and estimations of any possible repair time. Twice, Henkei pressed the men on their obvious sense of fear, asking why such an experienced crew, who no doubt had worked in many tunnels before, were so apprehensive of mere bricks and mortar. They avoided the questions. Looking nervously at one another, they would change the topic of conversation with monotone lethargy whenever it veered towards their experiences of the old sewers, or of their previous supervisor's unceremonious departure from the job. It began to dawn on Henkei that the men's verbal and physical awkwardness was not the result of tensions between workers, but rather of a deep-seated and worrying apprehension. Of what? He did not know. What was clear was that his team were counting down the minutes until their shift ended, when they could finally clamber out of the darkness into the safety and sunshine of the world above. As the beam from his headlamp trickled over the damp and crumbling brickwork, Henkei again conceded to himself that some may find such a setting unnerving, but not him. Whatever had caused such trepidation and disquiet among the other men was surely a simple case of idle superstition, mischief-making, or the understandable psychological toll of working in a dark, cramped, and forgotten part of the city. Even Jones, who had through most of the catacombs been jovial and talkative, now adopted the same sullen expression and serious disposition as they made their way deeper into the oldest part of the sewers. The passages wound and meandered their way through the ground, long steady trajectories intermittently and abruptly interrupted by sharp blind corners, making it difficult for Henkei to identify exactly where they were. There were so many winding corridors that he felt disoriented and was ready to joke with his men that if they didn't like him as a boss, they could probably leave him there and he would never find his way out. But his men were no longer beside him. He was standing at the mouth of a tunnel, and while he had continued onward, talking, trying to fill in the difficult silences, his men had stopped at the last junction. They stood motionless, some 20 feet behind, staring at Henkei with blank expressions, occasionally betrayed by the slightest flicker of a very real and gripping emotion beneath. A look of suppressed terror. When he asked why the men were not following, they whispered in reply that where they stood was where the last of the repair work was needed. Pulling out a map and perusing it intently by the light of his headlamp, Henkei surmised that he must have wandered into the remotest part of the sewer network, at the back of the catacombs, and, while the tunnels continued into the foreboding distance, where he now stood must have marked the boundary of the Rijksmuseum's foundations. What confused him, however, was that the area had been clearly listed on the map for repair. He was standing at the entrance to what appeared to be a rather innocuous tunnel, but on the wall next to the opening, he could clearly see that someone had placed an identification plaque there, marking it for repair. It read, Tunnel 72F, water damage and failing masonry. After double-checking the map, it was clear to Henkei that Tunnel 72F was indeed still under the Rijksmuseum's foundations and had to be appraised and repaired. But when he told his men this, They simply informed him that where they stood was as far as they would go. Anger began to take over, accompanied by frustration that the team he was supposed to be supervising was being so difficult. But even raising his voice and demanding that they head into the tunnel did not move them. Just as things became increasingly heated and Henge yelled at the men to do as he said, Jones interjected. "We've worked down here for 2 months, boss. This is a good, hard-working, talented crew you have. They'll do exactly as you ask when you ask it, but you'll have to accept that, for them and me, our work stops at this junction, and that none of us will go near that tunnel. You might think it's mad, but whether you want to believe it or not, there's something in there." Taking a deep breath and calming himself, Henge explained to his men that he understood the stress induced by working in such a suffocating environment for an extended period of time, but that repairs had to be carried out in full. He would talk to them later about it, but for now, he would carry out the survey himself. For a moment there was silence, broken only by drips of unseen water which echoed out from a distant, unsure place. As Henge stepped over the threshold and into the apparently forbidden tunnel, Jones and the other men protested vehemently, shouting at him to leave the passageway immediately, but he saw this demonstration as nothing but foolishness. He was not to be swayed by unsubstantiated superstitious nonsense. There was nothing in that tunnel to fear. Just as he had done when he was a child, he would once more prove to others that they should not be so scared, by stepping up, being a man, and pushing forward into places others feared to tread. Pride coursed through his veins. His parents were brave and fearless before him, and he had long since sworn to always be bold, always be adventurous, to be just like them. With a smile, he looked back at his men before heading face first into the darkness, the excitement of self-reliance pushing him on. While the tunnel seemed fairly common in its construction at first glance, as he progressed deeper into its dank innards, it was apparent that this was unlike any sewer he had seen. The ground was uneven. The floor dipped and rose, much like some of the other tunnels, but what was peculiar was how fractured the surface felt under his feet. The ground was obscured by a thick, almost oily water, which in places reached up as high as his knees. He trudged through the stagnant liquid slowly, not because he was scared, but simply to ensure sound footing. One thing was apparent. However long ago the water had deposited there, it was long enough to fester and produce an unpleasant, rotting stench. The walls were of a different, significantly older composition than most of the brickwork he had seen in the sewers elsewhere. Whatever the material was which had been used, it was hundreds of years old. It was obviously failing, with long, penetrating cracks scarring the surface of the increasingly unstable walls and ceiling. The light from his headlamp was enough to illuminate much of the tunnel, but as Henge ventured further towards what he thought was a dead end, he realized that the passageway was narrowing, and that the tunnel itself did not stop there, but rather tapered slightly before curving abruptly around a blind corner. He estimated being over 100 feet into the sewer, and while his curiosity for what could be beyond the corner urged him to move forward, he believed he had made his point and would now ask his men to abandon their fears and enter the tunnel with him. Unholstering the black handheld radio he had been issued from his side, he began requesting for Jones and the others to meet him at the corner of the tunnel. No one responded, and nothing but a quiet buzz could be heard from the radio speaker. Of course, Henge now remembered that he had been warned about how unreliable the radios were, but just as he was about to turn and shout back down towards the opening, something caught his eye. Surely not. There should have been nothing in that disgusting place but stagnant water and himself. And yet, pulling and pushing relentlessly against his bravado and self-assured disposition was the creeping realization that something was standing at the end of the tunnel. Obscured mostly by the blind corner, he could only see a sliver of it, but it was unmistakable. A ragged piece of cloth poked out from around the corner, and although Henke's mind was unwilling to accept it, the cloth was obviously part of a sleeve. a sleeve that contained an arm, belonging to who or what he did not know. Stubbornness can be an effective tonic for even the most horrifying and unbelievable situations. Henkei's confidence in himself and his long history of triumphs over fear and adversity welled up inside of him. Filling his chest with confidence, and with a strong, assured stride, he gulped down a breath of the damp air and marched purposefully towards whatever was around that corner. The slush and slosh of the black water echoed throughout the tunnel as he made his way to the blind turn, almost hesitating as he reached it, an unease that was alien to him. Apprehension now turned to sadness and empathy for standing there in that cruel, dark passageway, shivering and disheveled, was a girl who could not have seen more than 13 years. Her face and hands were blackened with grime and dirt, hiding her pale and malnourished frame. A ripped shirt was all that she wore, hanging from her loosely with much of her body exposed to the cold of that damp, isolated place. Gazing at him between strands of dirty blonde matted hair, Henkei was struck by how beautiful the young girl was, and how afraid she must have been, how frightened and helpless. At first he believed that she must have somehow entered the sewers and lost her way, but no matter how softly he spoke, she would not answer, appearing afraid and nervous. He tried his radio again but was greeted with the same meaningless static. Regardless, he had to get her out of that tunnel, back through the sewers and into the Rijksmuseum and seen by a doctor. He didn't want to shout to his men in case the noise startled her and added to the girl's disquiet. The last thing he wanted to do was chase her through the catacombs, so he decided to lead her out of the passage himself. As he approached, he spoke gently to her in Dutch, explaining that he would take her up above to safety. Stepping forward with his hand outstretched, the girl seemed to quiver in fear. She appeared terrified of him. This made Henkei feel uncomfortable as he prided himself on being someone who would do anything to protect the vulnerable. Someone to be trusted, not feared. She made no sound, but as he reached her, she raised her left hand slowly, pointing one finger at the light on his head. He suddenly realized that the sharp light from the headlamp must have been frightening her, so he took the light off and held it in his hand to allay her fears, the lamp now casting shadows upward more starkly. The changed angle of light brought something unsettling to Henkei's attention. Pinned to the girl's torn shirt was a yellow cloth star. It surprised him as it was entirely familiar, but it took a moment for his mind to grasp the memory. It was exactly like the yellow stars forced upon the Jewish populations during their persecution to allow members of the Nazi regime and their conspirators to identify them. That can't be. Henkei's mind fought against the ramifications of such discovery. After a momentary pause, he once again was resolute, disregarding the cloth star and asserting to himself that he had to take the poor girl out of such horrible surroundings. A tremendous sense of unexplained sadness overcame him as he drew closer. The torch flickered unusually in his hand as he looked down at the girl, her face momentarily illuminated by the shifting light, her arms still outstretched, pointing at him. He would carry her out of the sewers if need be, but this sense of duty, this compulsion to be brave and assertive in even the darkest of places was now replaced by something which Henkei had never felt before. Running up his spine, and from the very pit of his stomach, fear gripped him. Terror took him, and a horror possessed him so potently that it made him unsteady, anxious, weak. For Henkei had not noticed something so subtle yet essential to his predicament. The girl had not stopped pointing at him as he drew closer. Her arm was rigid, and her finger remained outstretched. Even the light, which was now in his hand, seemed entirely unimportant to her. Realization swept over him like a plague of abject dread. The girl was not pointing at the light. She was pointing behind him. Henke did not remember much more of what happened in that tunnel, but he knew that he had indeed turned to face whatever had been standing behind him, whatever the girl had been pointing at. He thanked God, something he was not normally inclined to do, that Jones and those men who feared that dark hollow so acutely had shown true courage, running into the passageway as soon as they heard his screams. Henke regained his composure back at the alcove where he had met the men as they were carrying him out, but he immediately pleaded with them that they take him out of the tunnels to the world above, which is what they did. Once the rusted elevator reached the ground floor of the Rijksmuseum, they sat together in a small room at the back of the building and had a frank discussion about what had been happening down there over the past 2 months. Jones explained that the first survey team which had encountered that specific sewer passageway resigned from their posts after just 1 night down there. A week later, one of their co-workers who decided to stay on committed suicide after complaining repeatedly to everyone that he could hear whispers coming from somewhere as he worked nearby. Not long after that, Jones's previous supervisor, the man Henke had replaced, saw someone, an unidentified figure, standing at the mouth of Tunnel 72F, and had followed it inside. One of the cleanup crews found him shortly after, crawling out of the sewer on his hands and knees, crying hysterically like a child. He had been hospitalized and heavily medicated ever since, but no one knew exactly what he had seen down there. He would not speak of it, but the men who recovered him claimed he was repeating only 1 word when he was found. Just 1 word, over and over again frantically. Nazi. 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 Henke was a nervous wreck after his experience and ordered that no one under any circumstances be allowed to go into Tunnel 72F. He continued to work down in the other sewer passageways, day after day in the dark, but he was consumed by the notion that he had seen something so frightening, so terrifying, that he had forced himself to forget the ordeal. Over the next few weeks he lost weight and had trouble sleeping, often waking up in a disturbed state, drenched in a cold sweat, unable to recall what he had been dreaming about. The very idea that he, above all people, brave Henke, could be reduced to such fragility that he could be affected so deeply by something he could not even remember in its entirety, preyed upon his pride and his sense of self-worth. His bravery had always defined him, and now it was gone. In an effort to combat the feelings of helplessness and self-loathing, he attempted to find out all he could about the tunnels under the Rijksmuseum. Knowledge, as they say, is power, and my friend felt that if he knew more about the place in the dark, that he would somehow be less afraid of it. He read about the history of the museum on the nights he could not sleep, and while he found very little of it helpful, one local legend struck a chord within him. It was rumored that during the Second World War, a number of Jewish families took refuge in the tunnels below the Rijksmuseum. When 2 SS officers were tipped off as to their whereabouts, they entered the tunnels with some local volunteers hoping to arrest the people down there, and then most probably send them off to a concentration camp. The rumors were that the families managed to ambush the SS officers and their Nazi sympathizers, killing them and dumping their bodies somewhere in the sewers. This was the story Henke related to me when I met him in Amsterdam. It was sad to see him so shaken and vulnerable, a strong, powerful individual who had never shown so much as a hint of fear for, or of, anything in his life. A friend who I respected greatly, one with such indelible character, to be reduced to a diminished man living on his nerves. He thanked me for listening to his burdens, and I regrettably had to leave shortly afterward to catch a flight back to Glasgow. Unfortunately, the story does not end there. Some men are haunted both by what they have seen and by what they cannot understand. Ego can be a terrible burden for anyone. Once it is fractured or damaged, the lasting effects can be devastating. Henke could not let go of his pride nor his desire to feel strong again. Whole. He had never been afraid of anything before, and no matter what was in that tunnel, no matter how much anyone attempted to dissuade him, he was determined to confront it and reclaim his self-belief. 3 days later, Henke's body was found at the mouth of Tunnel 72F, stuffed into an old duffel bag. It was a heart attack which had killed him, but whoever broke, twisted and shoved his body into that morbid sack after he died was never caught. I should mention that the bag was of peculiar interest to the police in the event that it could reveal something about Henke's death. It was traced to Germany, military issue, and had not been manufactured since 1941.
Chapter 1. Blake and Danny's Dark Tourism. Welcome to Helltown, Ohio. The dripping letters and numbers appeared to have been spray-painted over the original town's name and stats. Population, 3 million plus. Elevation, minus 6,666. A nice place to visit. A better place to live. I laughed out loud at the advertisement of millions of souls inhabiting Helltown happily below sea level. At almost negative 7,000 feet, it certainly qualified to be the depths of hell. The earthly inhabitants appeared to have long disappeared as the placard stood off-level and unmaintained. Its metal posts were twisted, and the billboard dented on its edges and corners. It leaned sadly to its side, adorned with a multitude of bullet holes. The steel carcass, long rusted underneath its faded green background, now lent the appearance of barely an ability to be standing on its own. Nature's cancer had left it behind to die slowly along the deserted highway. Trails of weathered brown stains bleeding down the marquee's face resembled tears from the decades of an ignored state of disrepair. Looking out past the town's once proud billboard of welcome, I cracked another smile to myself. Carefully, of course, knowing Danny took this whole undead business very seriously. This is where our adventure would begin, our attempt at searching out scary sites of horror and macabre lore. This place, this Helltown if you will, held several legends to explore and seemed to be a popular destination for this new type of horror-seeking vacationers. A group we had now invested ownership in by traveling long distance from Missouri for the faint chance of having the shit scared out of us. I'd been hoping for sand and Florida beaches or even Mexico, but Danny thought that sounded too ordinaire. There would be no rolling ocean waves or umbrella drinks on chaise lounges this time, but hey, this destination boasted a slew of everything, including a haunted cemetery, a community of chemically plagued walking dead zombies, and huge pythons. It didn't even stop at that. There were also satanic cultists practicing sacrificial offerings in the Old Town Church. And let's not forget the haunted bridge, complete with an undead toddler skittering around its structure nightly. Who could say no to this, right? I looked over at Danny, my fiancée, and she smiled. Granted, it was a nervous smile, but she'd asked for this. The entire idea had been all hers. I parked alongside the road where the highway was blocked by railings that were nailed into large wooden posts. What followed on the backside was several huge boulders. It felt like a second warning, ensuring any would-be trespasser to take heed, because you weren't welcome if you hadn't understood this by the first obstacle. Just across these barricades, one old highway led off to the left, and on our side of the blockade, the newer road continued to the right. A dilapidated old church was surrounded and propped up by tree branches, slowly swallowing the building's remnants with its limbs and roots. The holy structure barely holding itself in place as it leaned, slightly left, and cantered toward us. I imagined giant octopus arms intertwined, constricting what little life was still left. The once beautifully color-stained windows were mostly long busted out, leaving only shards of dagger-like pieces to dissuade the outside elements from entering in. Eerie darkness spilled from its opening as the large front entrance lay gaping wide. It should be screaming out in pain and horror, and even the thought nudged me to stand still several moments, concentrating my ears to search for such sounds. But only silence answered back. To the left of the church, alongside the abandoned highway, sat an old school bus, the yellow paint losing its battle with decay, allowing the rust to take its grip and feast on its metal body, leaving gaping open wounds. I looked over to Danny. "Well, babe, we're here. Goodbye swimsuits and cool water. Hello, Helltown. The dark adventure begins now." I lifted my leg over the railing and turned my gaze to her, offering my hand to assist. The sky was clear except for a few dark scattered clouds to the south. The dense, humid air was almost deafening, as nary a sound of another soul was acknowledged. There were no birds chirping or crickets chattering. Only emptiness and the heat of the day's soaked sun surrounded us. It looked as if we owned the entire area to ourselves. I couldn't remember when we had passed another car or seen so much as a gas station alongside the road. We were deep in the boonies of the Cuyahoga Valley. I could almost hear dueling banjos playing in the distance like Burt Reynolds and his friends heard in the movie Deliverance. The opening scene just before their personal hell swallowed them up, surrounding them in a terror some would end up not surviving. I shook the feeling off with a nervous smile as the banjo played on inside my head.
Blake?
Danny hesitated as she grabbed for my hand and lifted her left leg over the metal guard.
I know that this was my idea.
Her eyes searched until they met mine square, her teeth biting at her lower lip.
Do you think this is smart? I mean, now that we're here, it's already very late in the afternoon and no one else is around. I expected to see other adventurers.
I saw an authentic concern and hesitation in her beautiful dark green eyes.
I know I sound like a baby now, but...
I smiled and her gaze lightened in tone just a bit.
Never mind. We'll be okay. You would never leave me anyway.
No, Danny, I would never leave you. I love you, sweetie. We're a team that is irreplaceable. She placed her other hand on my shoulder for balance and finished clearing her body onto the side of the railing where I stood. She leaned in, tightening her arms around my neck, pulling herself closer. I could feel her warm breath on my skin just below my ears. The heat it held, along with the softness in her sigh, drew me in to hug her tightly and offer assurance. "Babe, we don't have to do this if you're uncomfortable."
Blake.
She interrupted.
I didn't have you drive for 9 hours to come this far just to turn around.
She pushed back and smiled at me.
I'm okay. It was my idea. And there's no way I'm not following through. I've dreamed for this day to finally arrive. Far too long to go home now unanswered.
She moved her hands from around my shoulders and grabbed me, leading us toward the church with vigor.
Oh, look! The website was right. There's the upside-down crosses over the door and below the steeple roof. Watch out for any sacrificial devil worshippers. Last one in gets to watch the other's heart get eaten.
She giggled. As we walked closer, we could see the paint was completely gone from the lap siding. The wood was stained with mold and rotted piles of chip paint lay stacked around the foundation. It was difficult to imagine how this church would have appeared back when it was painted a brilliant white. I tried to picture a manicured yard surrounding it and free from the crooked limbs and knotted roots which now choked its life slowly from existence. Carefully stepping through the opening and dodging spider webs and debris, I noticed the slow, scary creaking sound of the door opening was missing. Reason being, it lay broken off its hinges, cast to the side like a defiled and defeated guardian. It felt almost sacrilegious, the state this church had been allowed to fall into. It did make it even a more fitting place for worshiping the dark angel instead of God. I briefly wondered if even the Almighty felt sorrow at the destruction of his house. The wind had been still and silent until the moment I stepped past the threshold. Suddenly I could feel a cool breeze, and it only felt colder after Danny followed me inside.
Wow, it feels nice in here. I thought it would be stuffy and hot.
Danny stated. Funny, it was hot and dank at first. The breeze didn't cool things off until I fully stepped through.
Are you messing with me, Blake? Really? I mean, maybe it's all the spirits of the victims who were sacrificed. Could be their cold souls entrapped within these walls.
She poked me in the back and chuckled. I'm dead serious, Danny.
Shh.
Danny's ears perked and her eyes became focused as she scanned the large sanctuary. Several pews were shoved in groups against the walls, while others lay broken and scattered about. What, babe?
Did you hear that?
She held her finger to her lips as if to shush me again. I felt a chill travel the length of my spine. Hey, are you messing with me now?
Don't tell me you don't hear those children's voices, squeals and giggles.
Danny kept her smile hidden until she finally turned and showed her face to me. Danny, you bitch. You had me for a minute. I smiled but found little humor in it when it came right down to it. I knew I'd felt weird cold chills hovering around me, and I was beginning to think I'd started to hear kids' giggles myself, and that was before she ever mentioned them.
Oh, Blake, who's the chicken shit now? I'm gonna have to rethink this whole engagement thing if you're gonna be such a fraidy cat. I never took you as the pussy type. I mean...
She giggled again. I lightly stepped further into the room, dodging some oddly placed sticks and stones, knowing they could indeed break bones. Chuckling to myself at the odd timing the old nursery rhyme entered my thoughts. I noticed the altar lying directly in front of us. There appeared to be some small bones and feathers piled on a stone slab in the center. The lectern lay toppled on its side to the right and bore a drippy red spray-painted pentagram on its dusty walnut front. It was displayed directly over a wooden cross that was carved into its face. The paint was brown from age and exposure. Obviously, it wasn't all that old, though. Certainly not as old as the legend read of the church's inception. I remember reading that Satanists had taken over the church early in its beginnings. Spray paint wasn't available back in 1806 when Boston Township was founded and the Roman Catholic Church, Mother of Sorrows, was erected. Danny and I had researched this area several weeks earlier on all the legends and spooky tales involved before deciding to take our vacation trip to check this place out. The haunted school bus where children's voices could be heard, the cemetery where the old man ghost sat on a bench or wandered the grounds aimlessly, and of course, Crybaby Bridge, where a distraught mother threw her young toddler into the river. Legend has it that if you parked your car on Crybaby Bridge and took your keys with you, when you returned, your car would be running and locked. The hood and top would be covered in dust with fresh baby's footprints embedded. We planned to check out as many of these scary legends as possible.
Blake, it's getting really cold in here. I think I'm ready to move on and check out the school bus.
I agree, it's chilly. Must be an underground spring or something.
The polluted one that caused the mutants to grow red pupiled eyes and the thirst for human flesh?
Danny asked. Yeah, zombies that want nothing but our blood. The sun suddenly dipped behind a cloud and simultaneously painted the sanctuary pitch black for several seconds.
Well, that was eerie. Blake, I'm ready to call it good and move on.
It's just the spirits trying to enhance the experience for you, babe. As I made my way towards the door, I noticed what looked like a blood trail on the floor. Drips gathered into dried puddles periodically on the dingy, dust-covered boards. What made them stand out was that some of the puddles seemed to be underneath the layers of dust, while others clearly sat on the top layer. I leaned down, pulling my knife from its sheath, and pointed my flashlight toward the area in front of my knee. Using the blade and gently lifting a drip that appeared to sit on top, I easily scooted it to the right. To my surprise, the droplet stayed intact. "Danny, come here, look at this." I heard the soft crunch of her footsteps, her shadow darkening the area in front of me slightly.
What? What are you looking at?
"I'm not sure. Looks like dried blood drops. But do you see what I see?"
Blake, stop trying to scare me. I'm ready to move on. It looks like lantern oil or something, to me anyway.
"Danny, I'm dead serious. Look, this is odd. The blood or oil, it's dry. It's obviously been here for a long time. Oddly though, if not impossible, some of it dried on the top layer of dust and some drips are dried underneath the dust. How does that happen?" I took the edge of my knife and scooted the droplet, sliding it onto the top dust layer, exposing more droplets underneath. "If this blood..."
Or oil,
Danny interrupted, sounding curt with her comment. "Okay, fine," I replied. "If this is oil, it was all from the same body or container," I retorted pointedly. "It would have pooled together and mixed, not dried and then given enough time for dust to settle before another drip could fall. It doesn't make any sense whether it's blood or oil. Don't you find that odd?"
Yes, it's odd, okay? Let's just go, Mr. Scientist. I don't like the feeling I'm getting in this place. I don't want to add our layer of blood on top for the next dark tourist to find and then question how in the hell it ended up here. Let's get out.
"To me, it suggests different sacrificial killings at different times, and..." I stopped voicing my opinion when Danny turned, got up, and began walking away. "Okay, I agree, it's downright creepy in here." I sheathed my knife and turned to lift myself up off my knee. The dim light flickered, and I thought I saw a shadow pass across one of the glassless windows. "Did you see that?"
Yeah. Oh my god, Blake. You're right, okay? I saw what the blood drops could possibly be. Now, can we just get the fuck out of here?
Danny said with building anger. "No, Danny, I mean that shadow that just passed."
Screw you, Blake. I'm leaving.
Danny began to move more briskly towards the door, which was on the opposite side of the window I had seen the shadow. "Someone's out there, Danny. Wait a minute." She stopped cold. In a whisper, she spoke as she turned back to face me.
Did you hear that? Twigs snapping.
Danny's eyes instantly filled with fear.
What do we do? Something is out there.
Chapter 2. Tension grows. Outside the church's structure, I thought I noticed another black shadow as it moved past a second window. Leaves crumpled under the footsteps, and the sounds continued. There were more footsteps that followed briskly behind, but no voices. Had other tourists showed up while we were inside? On the front side of the church, I led and Danny followed, almost on top of me. Once we were several feet from the front door, I looked toward the bus on the right and then panned my eyes towards my Jeep Explorer. It still sat parked, appearing undisturbed. Well, no visitors other than us, babe. Must have just been our imaginations. You know, a case of the jitters. Do we want to check out the bus or head for our Jeep? The sound of children giggling erupted in taunting voices and echoed from behind the old school bus. Danny reached for my hand.
The Jeep. Let's hurry.
She led us into a fast-paced jog once we cleared the roots, which dipped in and out of the ground like serpents grouping together in a coiled ball. She nor I looked back until we hurdled the roadblock, each of us reaching our respective doors. I shoved my hands into my pocket for the keys but found nothing other than change jingling. Danny, give me the keys.
I don't have them, Blake. You drove, remember?
I don't have them. Chapter 3. Unraveling. I looked over the top of the Jeep, then back to the church we had just come from. my hands still inside my pockets, nervously searching for keys I didn't remember putting there. I peeked inside the window of the vehicle. Damn it!
What? Blake, hurry. I'm scared, okay? If you're joking, stop. It's not funny anymore.
They're in the damned ignition. I pulled my right hand out of my pocket and pulled the door handle, praying it was unlocked. Check your door, Danny. I tried again and then moved to the passenger door on my side. Locked. Keep trying the passenger door. I looked back across the hood to the church and I saw movement in the darkened shadows of the trees. Quick, Danny, try the hatch. There is something coming around the church. Hurry. I threw my backpack on the hood of the Jeep, fumbling with the zipper, trying to quickly open it. I heard a click and looked back to see Danny crawling into the hatch as she quickly cleared the back seat, moving forward. I withdrew the Glock 21 .45 caliber ACP from my pack, quickly grabbing the strap of the bag and moved backwards to the driver's door, pulling on the handle. Hurry, Danny, open my door. I looked toward the church again, this time seeing nothing. The Jeep door clicked and I swung it open and jumped in, throwing my bag and firearm onto Danny's lap. In a flash, I twisted the key, bringing the Jeep to life. Stomping the gas pedal to the floor as soon as the gear shift slammed into drive, the rear wheel spun, throwing gravel and debris behind us. Holy shit! I screamed as the rubber connected with the asphalt, squealing the tires and fishtailing us onto the highway we had just come from. My heart was pounding as I looked at Danny and then up to the rearview mirror. Was this real? Or did we just get spooked? Was there really something back there? Danny's eyes were full of tension. She was shaking with nervous energy, her breath still frantic and unsteady.
My God,
She reached over and slugged my arm hard with force.
Oh, you fuck! Why did you bring me here?
She burst into full-blown tears of panic, mixed, more than likely, with relief from our escape.
Why, Blake?
The Jeep began to lurch and lose power. It coughed and sputtered, jumped and sputtered again. Oh, shit! I instinctively looked at the gas gauge. Empty. Son of a...
Blake, don't play this game.
Her eyes wide open as she turned to look behind us, spying the roadblock and abandoned church still in view not that far behind.
Blake...
Sniffles overtook her words along with heaving, shaken breaths.
No more games, baby. I want to get as far away from here as we can.
I know, Danny, but I'm not playing games. I stared into the rearview mirror, expecting to see blood-dripping zombies or whatever we had caught a glimpse of that sent us running. Do you remember how far back up the road a gas station or something was? Anything that could help us? She punched me again and again in the arm as the Jeep sputtered its last gasp. I coasted her off to the shoulder onto the grass, still in sight of Helltown's entrance. I saw the church steeple rising above the treetops. The place we had thought to have escaped from unharmed was only a couple of thousand feet behind.
There wasn't anything for miles, Blake.
She spoke in broken words between catching her breath. She looked out over the horizon of hills and trees.
It's gonna be dark soon, isn't it?
She pounded on the dash as she buried her head into my shoulder. We're going to be okay, Danny. These are just legends made up to scare people, thrills to speed heartbeats. They're not real. There are no ghosts, no mutants from the toxic spill, or satanic worshippers hungry for human sacrifices. It's all lore and legend. I pulled her closer, squeezing her as tight as I could from the seated position we were in. Look at me, Danny. I pushed her forehead back so she could see my face. I promise, baby, I'm going to keep you safe. And I won't ever leave you. Now, do you remember anything on the other side of the bridge up ahead? Gas station, house, anything? Danny slowly turned her eyes back to the road ahead, her breaths more stable, but still fluctuating occasionally. As she turned back again, staring into my eyes, she began to speak.
Oh, no.
What, Danny? Her hand lifted, and she began to stretch out her finger, pointing toward the road ahead. Her lips trembled and her eyes dropped and formed a look of sudden defeat. Danny's finger finally stretched completely straight and trembled in an unsteady shake as she spoke.
Crybaby bridge.
That is when our predicament truly swept over me. We were trapped. Helltown was behind us, dark forests filled with trees on either side, and a river in front. A car out of gas that we sat in, and only a haunted bridge to cross the river that would separate us from the spook-filled town and home. A town where we had seen weird blood drops and creepy shadows of possible toxin-poisoned mutants stalking the area. A bridge where, according to local lore, a crazy woman tossed her baby over into the river for no known reason. A bridge that now supposedly held ghosts of that horror from the past, somehow left stranded to terrorize anyone who parked on it and got out. Well, we weren't parked on it, but we were damn sure close. The legend said that if you parked on the bridge and got out with your car turned off, upon return, your car would be running, doors locked, and dust. Baby tracks. Well, shit. What to do? What to do? Chapter 4. A plan nobody likes. We sat in silence as the sun continued its slow fall behind the horizon in front of us. Not one single car had passed, nor did anything break the stillness around us. Neither Danny or I held any words to speak. I knew she'd blame me for all of this. Even though this dark tourism was her passion, by no means mine. Somehow, though, the outcome of this ordeal suddenly felt neatly laid upon my plate. I glanced over at her, slightly bitter as she silently stared out her window. I glanced into the rearview mirror toward Helltown. I could still see where the road veered to the left off the highway, the sinking sun reflecting from the town's placard. That sign that had the balls to display their farcical creed, a nice place to visit, a better place to live. Yeah, like hell it was. The welcoming committee for this place sucked. One thing kept going through my head as we sat in silence. The sun would soon be leaving us, and darkness would take its place. Nightfall and Helltown did not seem a good fit together, especially with what we had just experienced in the late afternoon sun. I imagined it could only get worse. Danny would not go walking back from the direction we had just come, and how could I blame her? We held no clues what lie past Helltown on the highway to the right anyway. Venturing off into the wilderness away from the highway to our left or right was not an option either. The only viable solution was to walk across the damned bridge and head back from whence we had first come, looking for anyone who could help us. We weren't parked on the bridge and our Jeep was out of gas, so the legend didn't really fit our circumstances. Danny. I looked her way and waited for her to respond. Nothing. I reached over and cupped her hand with mine. Danny, we have to do something. I suggest we leave our vehicle and walk forward. Surely we'll stumble onto someone willing to help us. We're in the fucking heartland of America. People are good neighbors here. I paused and waited. Silence. We can't just sit here and do nothing.
I'm not crossing that haunted bridge, Blake. I won't allow myself to witness that innocent baby being tossed over the railing by some whacked-out bitch, even if they are just ghosts. No longer human.
I can go look for gas, and you could stay locked up in the Jeep with my handgun if you'd rather.
What the hell happened to, I won't ever leave you, Danny, I love you?
She asked as her eyes began to aim daggers at me. I reached under the seat and pulled out my other Glock, a G36 Slim, the same caliber as my G21, only more compact.
Blake, what the hell? I didn't know you had another Glock.
We can either take it with us and each be armed as we walk across that damn bridge, together. I paused. Or I leave it with you and I go alone. Those are the only legitimate options. I want you with me. That's my preference.
You'd really leave me here alone while you take off across that haunted bridge and leave me trapped in between two scary-ass sights, in the dark, by myself?
She guffawed.
Wow, that's some damn true love right there. I guess in a way, it's a good thing we took this trip. I'm glad I'm finding out your lack of loyalty and love for me before we actually tied the eternal fucking knot together.
Danny, damn it. That's not fair. I'm trying to do the best I can. I don't want to leave you. I want you beside me. But we can't just sit here and wait. It's been an hour, and no one or nothing has so much as made a noise, let alone driven by. I think society has ceased existence out here. Do you really want to just sit in place in the pitch black, waiting for those damned goons to make their way here if they do exist? Come with me. The bridge legend doesn't even fit our circumstances. We weren't parked on the bridge and the Jeep doesn't have any fuel anyway. It can't run. And who cares about dust and footprints? Who gives a shit? My voice was rising and I hated that fact. I forced myself to tone it down.
I'm scared, Blake. If we get out of this, don't ever let me talk you into another ghost adventure. Please, don't ever take me anywhere like this, ever again, even if I beg you, which I won't.
She began to open her door as she carefully looked around.
Give me the fucking Glock, damn it.
We both climbed out of the Jeep and looked back as the last of the sun sank below the horizon. If it were different circumstances, I know we'd both see the beauty in the pink and orange sky slowly darkening while the tops of the hills gleamed a streak of beautiful crimson red as it became swallowed up by the blackness. There was no bright moon shining its beacon of hope, only scattered shimmering stars beginning to twinkle above. We both began walking towards the bridge, hand in hand, each packing a .45 in our other hands. Chapter 5. What the hell was that? The burbling of the river became an audible sound about 30 yards into crossing the seam of the bridge. It felt like a stab at breaking the silence when Danny suddenly asked me the question.
So, would you have really left me back in the car, alone?
Danny, do you really want to go there now? I mean, we're not out of the woods. While I don't totally buy into all these mutant children of the corn crap, we are stuck here without wheels, out of gas in the middle of fucking nowhere, and the sun has left us in the dark.
Why did you bring me here then? What was your drive to make this trip?
I could hear a seriousness in her voice. The question wasn't just to break the silence and make the walk go by faster. She was searching for real reasons. We were going to have that long conversation involving the old, "Why do you say you love me?" conversation. I do love her. At least I think I do. Danny, I don't want to go there. Not ever, and certainly not now. You know I love you. I would have left both handguns with you if it came down to it, but...
You've told me several times that you wouldn't leave me no matter what.
The footsteps forward stopped and she turned.
Maybe we should put a hold on plans.
I don't know what to say other than this conversation needs to stop right. There was a sudden shrill squeal before there was the sound of a loud water splash, as if someone had hurled a large rock into the river. I immediately pushed past Danny and quick-stepped to the bridge wall and peeked over. The slow-moving river was a dark, empty blackness winding through light stones that glimmered from the stars' reflection. Without enough light to truly make out what was below in the dark, gurgling water, I pulled a small mag light from my pocket. Shining it down onto the water's surface, I swore I saw rings echoing outward from the middle of the flowing liquid, but I saw no sign of what would have caused it as it quickly dissipated into the dim blur of movement. The sound of footsteps disappearing into the distance drew my attention back to the bridge's surface. I fully expected to see Danny walking away from me, but I wasn't certain which direction she would have chosen. I knew she was disappointed in me. Our relationship was suffering through the weirdness and tension of our first trip together alone. My mind was scattered and twisted, thoroughly confused and fatigued. I pointed the beam toward the Jeep, and much to my surprise, Danny was still standing only a few feet from me. I turned to the far side of the bridge, expecting to see nothing but a darkened horizon of empty road disappearing into the blackness. What I saw instead was the frantic movement of what appeared to be a glowing aura surrounding a lone woman with flailing arms, her back to both of us. As the light hit her image, she faded somewhat, and a distraught squeal could be heard in the distance again. Looking back to Danny, I could tell she saw her too. This was not my imagination. Danny was frozen like a statue, her eyes large white orbs bulging with fright. We were both glued to watching the apparition walk in erratic circles, as if dodging my beam of light before she turned and stared at us for a moment. As if caught, she turned away and evaporated into the silent stillness of the night. In the few seconds we stood trying to understand what we had just experienced, a subtle breeze began to softly blow. It was unnoticeable at first, but it became stronger, as if the bridge were funneling the breeze like a wind tunnel, causing the gust to build in strength. It felt very cold on my ankles, and when I looked down, illuminating the area with the flashlight, I could see a light dusting of a grayish substance collecting across the floor of the bridge. Danny spoke my name with an odd calm, and when I glanced over, I saw her lips moving, yet no words spilled from her mouth. It suddenly felt like the world instantly existed only in slow motion. We held absolutely no control over any part of what was taking place. Danny's arm lifted and moved deliberately in front of her, and it drew my attention. My eyes rolled upward, watching her finger extend out as if to direct my vision to follow. Instinct forced my eyes to track it out to the distant side of the bridge she was pointing. Their tiny movements on the ground captivated my attention. I felt the muscles in my face instantly release their constriction as my mouth fell helplessly open. I spontaneously pinched my eyes closed as if it would erase the sight I was witnessing. I tried 2 or 3 more times, each attempt failing to make the sight disappear. Chapter 6. Watching Baby Steps. Tiny damp footprints soaked up the dust, leaving an awkward trail of a baby's path moving toward Danny and me in an odd and indirect approach. My brain attempted a warning, begging my body to take heed and run. Brainwaves crossed in the middle of this unprecedented quandary and left my muscles too jellified to move. I was amazed I was still in an upright position. I just stood there, completely mesmerized, watching tiny foot tracks wobble back and forth, to and fro. They left a map imprinted of where they had come from, sunken and dripping in the sheet of dust. I wasn't scared, although my heart pounded loudly. I swear it reverberated between the concrete bridge walls, resounding in my chest like listening to a subwoofer throb out a deep pounding bass from some young punk's car at a stoplight, pounding inside my torso, uninvited and causing involuntary palpitations. The sight evaded the ability to frighten me.
Blake?
Danny's voice seemed very distant, as if it came from one end of an empty auditorium, taking its time to reach me.
Blake!
My name echoed from behind, thundering louder as if time had somehow reversed the mechanics of how audible waves work with its relationship to my ears. My brain told me if Danny's voice came from behind, the second echo should be quieter, not louder. I felt confused and completely hypnotized by what I was witnessing. This impossibility of what I was experiencing. Footprints dancing awkwardly with no body or feet attached.
Blake!
My name suddenly assaulted my ears with booming resolve.
Run, Blake!
My moment of confusion snapped and smacked me in the face with a cold dose of reality. The tiny footprints came rambling closer to me. No visible or physical means to leave them in the dust. The actuality of the phenomenon hit me. I turned back and saw Danny's terrified expression pleading with me to save myself. Quickly acknowledging it could be for me to then save her, I forced my muscle and nerve structure to cooperate, helping me to indeed run. Once we had left the edge of the bridge and made it closer to the safety of the Jeep, we both turned back to the bridge in unison. The rambling footsteps halted. 2 tiny big toes were imprinted in the dust at the bridge seam. Neither passed the expansion joint between it and the road's asphalt, refusing to cross the finish line of the race. We looked at each other in an odd moment of calm. We were safe and now heard an oncoming vehicle. Maybe we would be saved by a passersby. Again, collectively, we turned toward the highway to face what was oncoming. A dark roadway lay empty in front of our view. The interior of the Jeep's windshield was fogged over, as if the air conditioner was left running on high. The vehicle that held no fuel in its tank was now idling before us, purring like a kitten nestled in a warm lap. Danny sobbed. She turned to face me.
We're gonna die here tonight.
Her expression hollow and sober.
Aren't we?
Her question hung in the empty space between us. My heart was pounding to a tempo I'd never felt before. I was almost to the Jeep when I turned to answer her question. I'm sure as hell not going to lay down and die. It'll take more than footprints from a baby or some apparition of the worst mother of the century guarding our exit. I stepped up to the driver's door and tugged on the handle. It was locked. "Damn it," I said aloud. Danny lifted her handle, and it was also locked. She reached for the passenger door. Locked. Just about the time she rounded the corner from checking the back hatch, there was a loud smash. Danny looked up as the driver's door glass shattered. The large rock I bashed it with now sat in my seat. I reached inside and opened the door, quickly brushing glass from my seat, tossing the rock to the side of the road where I had found it. This night couldn't get any worse, could it? Chapter 7. The Argument. We heard the crunching of grass echoing from across the road. Just as I turned toward the brushy area, it occurred to me that we had forgotten one of the legend's horrors surrounding the Helltown lore. The Peninsula Python, a snake created through mutation from the Creepypasta chemical dump that closed this town in the Cuyahoga Valley in 1986. Based on the sound coming from the blackness of the forest, if it were a snake, it had to be huge. It could also be a satanic worshiper stalking us from the cover of the tall weeds, looking to capture an enthusiast of dark tourism to offer up to the devil. A thought neither Danny nor I had considered, or at least that's what I thought. We were just foolish posers, bored with the usual weekend in Missouri, and just out to experience something other than the ghost-inhabited Pythian Castle or the haunted albino farm, both in Springfield. It could also be mutant zombies, like the dark silhouettes I now believed were not figments of our imaginations as I had earlier thought. "Danny!" I hollered as I got in the car and reached over to unlock her door, seeing her run past the windshield. "Get inside the car!" As soon as her butt hit the seat, I revved the engine before shoving the gear shift into drive. The Jeep lurched forward again, chirping the tires on the asphalt, and I wasn't going to slow down until we were far past the bridge and on the other side of this hell, which refused to loosen its grip on us. It didn't matter if the toddler's body, who left those prints, became visible. This vehicle wasn't going to stop for anything. At least that was my intention, but intentions don't always meet the reality as strategized. My trusty Jeep shot forward past the footprints that had ended at the seam of the bridge and road, leaving a horrid thump and bump as we crossed. I could feel what must be the undead toddler rolling and bouncing underneath the floorboard of the vehicle, like if I had hit a small dog that had shot out in front of us, its legs flipping and rolling below us. I felt every bump and thud. The only thing was, I had seen nothing in my headlights as we blasted onto the bridge. It didn't matter. I wasn't going to stop. There were no amends to be made with this creepy, fucked up town in the middle of nowhere. We weren't stopping for no one or nothing. Again, that was my plan, but like a general in the military will tell you, the best laid plans often go awry. I'll admit, we both looked behind us to see what might roll out from the undercarriage of the Jeep as we continued, but nothing appeared. Danny cried out,
"Why are you slowing down? You didn't hit anything! Just go, damn it!"
Tears of fright filled her eyes as black streaks of mascara now lent proof that she had been through hell. "I'm not slowing down because I want to, Danny. The damn Jeep has a mind of its own. There was no fuel. I don't know how I was running to begin with." The momentum kept us rolling until we were close to 7 or 8 yards from the other side of the bridge, a little less than midway. The side of the bridge the mother who had just thrown her baby into the river had disappeared from. I turned to Danny, no longer able to keep my look of hope painted across my face. "I fucking give up. You asked if you were gonna die tonight." I looked away and my head dropped in shame. I'd given this my best shot, and I was beat. I thought this trip was bullshit from the start. I hated ghost hunting as much as I despised those stupid fucking geocaching and Pokemon Go nerds. I knew why I'd given in. It wasn't because I gave a shit about local lore and haunted legends. I now knew it was possibly not even because I loved Danny. It all boiled down to sex. I knew she'd get all excited and tensed, and then at the end of the evening we'd go back to our motel room and she would ride me like the fucking rodeo bronco I thought I was. I wanted to be her boy toy, not her satanic-seeking sidekick. My only disappointment now was being stuck here on a haunted bridge on the outer edge of Helltown. and unless I could convince her that this was our last chance to make love here in my Jeep with the busted-out window, I wouldn't be getting laid that one last time before I died. Priorities, right? I thought to myself as I lifted my head back up and smirked.
Finish your sentence, Blake.
What? I asked.
You were saying about how you told me earlier when I asked about dying tonight. You quit talking for what seemed like an hour, and then guffawed just now.
I was thinking, just in case we don't make it, you wanna... The thought must have been smeared across my face. John to his whore. Was it that obvious?
Blake, tell me you're not suggesting sex. Are you serious? Is that all I am to you? Is that why you were just gonna leave me here with your damn gun while you walked away?
When she said it like that, I felt like a jerk. But not only had I agreed to take her on this ridiculous adventure, but I had also done everything in my power to keep her safe through this insanity. Now look at us. I'm struggling with the reality that we might not survive the night. But somehow, I'm the bad guy for wanting to go out with a bang.
You're an asshole,
Danny said.
My mom was right. Should have never said yes so damn fast.
I wanted to respond. I knew part of her nailed me right on top of my head, like a 10-penny nail. I sat silently trying to survey the lay of the land as much as I could see on a moonless night. I shook my head to myself again. Legends were rarely real. This was crazy. Surely we would both wake up in our bed, realize it was all a weird bad dream, and then go straight for the skin game.
I'm watching the looks on your face, Blake. You can sit there in silence, but you can be read like a cheap erotica novel.
Danny shook her head and sneered.
I should have seen it sooner.
I can leave if you'd like, was the only pitiful response I could muster.
Nothing like sitting in the middle of a haunted-ass bridge in a haunted-ass town, wondering when some frickin' mutant zombie or a python or devil worshiper is gonna kill us.
Danny drew a large, shaky breath before continuing.
And we're sitting in your Jeep like we're parked in my driveway back home. The focal point of everything evil could be outside surrounding us. And we're having our first major fight together about shagging or not. Priceless.
I laughed and smiled at Danny. You got that right. I'm sorry. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not leaving you here alone either. We're not gonna die, and when this is over, hopefully we can find some humor along with forgiveness from each other. I agree that I haven't handled this unusual pressure very well. There was a brief silence between us. I still love you, Danny.
I hope so.
Danny looked into my eyes. Her upper lip slightly quivered.
I'd hate to think I wasted such an adventure on someone unworthy.
We both smiled, and she moved her hand to mine, which was still grasping the gear shift. My head lifted, and my eyes searched to find hers in the darkened cab of the vehicle. Can I ask one favor from you, since it seems we're bearing the hatchet and making up? I moved my hand over to her shoulder, my fingers lightly caressing the base of her neck. I mean, this is the nicest way. Can I pick the next vacation destination? Maybe a Florida beach or Cancun? She slugged me on my arm, and I felt the vehicle move slightly. Shush, I instantly cautioned, holding my finger up to my mouth. There was a soft sound, like sandpaper quietly being pulled across a rough piece of wood. We both froze in silence, our eyes intermittently moving from each other to the windows that enclosed us. I could instantly smell something that stunk. It smelled musky and decayed. I turned to Danny and asked, "Do you smell?" Bam! Danny instantly screamed hysterically in the shrillest, ear-piercing shriek. Chapter 8. Suddenly Alone. The python's head quickly penetrated the opening of the Jeep's door where the window glass once resided. Blake's face was 180 degrees opposite of the opening, staring at Danny. They had just come to terms and made up, making light humor about their situation, both feeling as if the worst was quite possibly over. just 6 or 7 hours from daylight to go. They had sat in the nearly sealed compartment of the Jeep, which was parked just past midway across the river atop Crybaby Bridge. It had taken breaking out the driver's side window to get this far before the engine sputtered once again to a dead roll. A cool breeze was blowing into the cab through Blake's open window. Danny's eyes had clearly shown she knew a makeup kiss was just seconds away from sealing their truce. Blake's tongue was just beginning to wetten with anticipation. She had also surely heard the strange, scratchy noise and felt the Jeep jar back and forth slightly. It had drawn her view to the open window and Blake's last living sight of her eyes. That's when the dark shadow had become an instant nightmare. A snake's head, its mouth wide open when it struck the back of Blake's head with a jolt, piercing his skin and gripping his skull within its sharp teeth like a vice. Blake barely had enough time to open his eyes wider. The back of his head now clamped tightly in the grip of the gigantic snake's jaws. The python's sheer weight pulled Blake slowly backwards toward the open window head first. His hands flailed, grabbing at the ceiling and door frame as the monstrous reptile pulled his bloodied body backwards out through the window. The huge, slithery serpent instantly began wrapping its thick, scaled body around Blake, constricting him tightly as he was finally pulled entirely through. Danny shook as she screamed out. Her first thought was to run, but she quickly remembered what she had seen back behind her at the church and before her on the bridge. She was still trapped, but now even worse. Blake was surely gone for good. Were there more snakes outside? She saw Blake's shoe slowly fall back into the car as the last part of his body, his foot, slid out and down the side of the vehicle's door. She saw the gun lying on the dash and quickly grabbed it. Danny instinctively used the palm of her hand to pull the slide towards the rear of the weapon and quickly release it, charging the chamber with a round. Putting her trigger finger just outside the trigger guard until ready to fire, she carefully crawled across the driver's seat to peer out the open window. The snake's huge, thick body had already tightly looped around Blake's body several times and was squeezing him tightly, its jaws disengaged and fully engulfing Blake's head. There was no target to shoot without hitting Blake. He was already gone, nothing but the sounds of bones crushing under pressure and body fluids being squeezed through compressed organs in subtle gurgles. The sight and sounds of what she was witnessing made her retch. She leaned toward the steering wheel and gagged, choking and spitting as her stomach tightened and cramped before spewing bile onto the dashboard and floor. She knew she had to leave the illusion of safety she felt in Blake's Jeep. Wiping her mouth and spitting what was left, she scooted back to the side farthest away from the open window. She had to think this through, quickly but thoroughly. Moving outside without a plan would be certain death. She was too smart for that. She looked down at her watch. 12 a.m., roughly 6 hours before daylight. She looked ahead through the windshield. Forward was the only route to take. She knew what lay behind her, and the distance from the bridge's rail to the river would bring broken bones or drowning for sure if she jumped. Yes, forward was the only way.
Think.
She spoke in a whisper to herself.
How far until there was help? Think. I would come from the direction that I needed to head.
She thought to herself. A gas station or farmhouse. What had she seen last before crossing the bridge on their way to Helltown? Another cool light breeze gusted through Blake's window. It stole her thoughts of what she had seen as far as human-populated places. Danny looked back to the windshield where she saw the light fog of dust blowing again, this time over the hood of the Jeep.
Oh shit, would the footprints be back?
She thought. Sure enough, the first footprint appeared on the hood and began its toddler's dance across the front as the wet prints climbed the thin surface of the windshield. Danny soon heard the pitter-pat of tiny footsteps on the hood above her, along with coos and squeals. The muzzle of the handgun rose instinctively toward the roof as her finger entered the trigger guard.
Could I really shoot through the roof into the sounds of the footsteps of a cooing toddler? I mean, even though I know it's no longer a living human being.
Danny had never been plagued with such a moral dilemma in her life as her internal thoughts battled for an answer. Her hand began to shake. She knew she could accidentally pull the trigger in such a state, so she slowly drew her finger back out away from the trigger and rested it against the slide.
No.
She answered her internal question out loud. The sounds continued as she reached over and flipped the headlight switch on, shining a bright path forward across the bridge's asphalt floor and past, into the darkness several hundred feet ahead. A shudder from everything inside her brain caused her to gasp and struggle to draw a much-needed deep lung-filled breath. As she slowly exhaled, she whispered,
"Calm. You can do this, Danny. You're a survivor."
She crawled back to Blake's window and carefully leaned out to look. The predator and its prey, her fiancé, were gone from sight, but she could still hear squishing, frothing noises from behind, towards the rear of the vehicle. After maneuvering back to her side, she turned to look behind one last time. The silence within the Jeep did not remain for very long.
"Oh, shit. Oh, shit,"
Danny said aloud, as if still talking to Blake. She saw at least a dozen dark images several hundred feet in the distance. They appeared to be moving slowly, and they were carrying torches that danced back and forth. The flames were subtle, but shined enough to light the dark figures below them.
"Fucking mutant zombies!"
Danny checked her waistband for her second handgun and lifted Blake's backpack containing everything else the two of them had between them. She rolled her window down slowly and carefully peeked outside, looking down and above, the steps on the roof still producing light thumps back and forth overhead. Swinging the door open,
"No real plan, but time to go,"
she said aloud as she cautiously put her foot on the ground and began swiftly moving across the bridge, her eyes roving from every angle, front to back and both sides, handgun charged and held in the defensive stance Blake had taught her. She looked behind her, and yes, the footprints were still following. She felt no threat from them now. She was glad she hadn't unloaded a magazine of 45 ACP hollow points into the roof of the Jeep. She didn't understand the mother tossing her baby, nor did she grasp the wet footprints running willy-nilly through the dust. She did, however, for a moment, believe neither had meant any harm to her or Blake. She now wished they would have both kept moving forward instead of back to the vehicle. He'd still be alive and with her if they had. There were only 3 more extended steps to where the bridge met the pavement. Danny glanced over her shoulder to check the distance between her and the shimmering. Danny smiled to herself, feeling proud momentarily of her achievement and ability to keep her composure.
"I may be a girl, but I'm a force to be reckoned with,"
she thought to herself.
"Keep it up, girl. You're gonna make it. I don't know how you'll explain this shit, but you will survive,"
were the words she spoke with excitement that gave her the veracity to continue on strong. Chapter 9. Reflections on the Move. As soon as her foot crossed the seam between the bridge and the side of the road Danny stood on, she felt as if a badge of courage had been pinned on her chest. She had done it. She had not only survived, but done it on her own, of her own accord and wits. She slowed to a quick-paced walk, checking over her shoulder regularly to see if the flickering flames had gained any. Her fear was subsiding, and her survival instincts and nerve were welling up from her soul. She kept Blake's gun in hand, pointed it ahead, tracking along with wherever she turned. It had been quiet with no new threats or surprises for several minutes, maybe even longer than she presumed. Her mind still raced with all the events and the fact that she was still in the middle of a dark unknown, in the center of nowhere. Danny reflected on the fact she had just lost a man she had thought she had fallen in love with, albeit in a very short time. They'd only known each other for less than 6 months. After a first major event with him, she had now questioned her judgment, along with who he really was after the first sign of danger. He had brought out the worst in her. Self-doubt, fear, helplessness had awakened a serious question. But he then began to draw her back into his good side, causing her to see the things that had attracted her to him in the beginning. He had shown so much promise at first, and then, bam! The choice to continue or insert their relationship into the proverbial hangman's noose was instantly stolen from her, swallowed up by a creature so unbelievable that she herself doubted its authenticity. One large shiver pulsed down her spine as her body twitched and shuddered at the recollection of the horrible scene that took place before her eyes. He was practically jerked from her hands just moments before they were going to kiss. Her body quivered again, and she suddenly felt naked without a flashlight. She felt watched, stalked like a prey caught in the sight of something dark and hungry, slithering through the grass and twigs just outside of the illumination of her light's beam. The stars were shining from a clear sky, but not enough to emblazon the shadowy landscape on either side of the road she now traveled. Pulling Blake's bag from her shoulder, she unzipped it, reaching inside for Blake's flashlight. She felt a couple of magazines for the handgun and pulled them out. Yes, fully stacked. She stuck them in her front pocket, easily accessible if needed. She turned the mag light on after replacing the bag back over her shoulder. Glock Slim G36 in her waistband, Glock G21 in her other hand, tracking the beam of light with the barrel, like the television cops do, like Blake had shown her. She always knew he was heavily driven by sex, but he did share most of the things she loved also, and she thoroughly enjoyed making love to him. It hurt to know he really hadn't wanted to take this trip. He had known how she wanted to start doing dark tours of ghostly sites since they had met. She had been with friends discussing them at the local bar when he popped over to say hello to a mutual acquaintance. Sites like Helltown were scattered all over the country. The internet was overloaded with different towns and states with secret little hellholes of legend and lore. Even Blake's friends sounded knowledgeable of some. The Joplin spook light was the culprit that ensnared Danny's interest at an early age. She had only been 16 when she snuck away with friends in the middle of the night to travel 60-some miles to witness the odd glowing orb bounce around the old empty farm road close to the Missouri-Oklahoma border. The moment it appeared from out of nowhere, it grabbed and held her attention. She couldn't believe such things really existed in this world. There certainly must be an alternate universe that connected with ours at special places across the planet. Places where the spirit world and this tangible world shared the same space. At the spook light site, the magical, unexplainable, brightly lit ball of color danced its way from the distance until it was inches before her eyes. The odd feeling it gave her as it passed through her body in seconds and then disappeared didn't scare her, but instead empowered her. She had never witnessed anything like it before, and when she turned, the orb was there again in front. Her friends had screamed, "Run!" as they all scurried back towards the car. She stood entranced by the experience. The oddity of it all, from that point on, was inside her soul. She had always wanted more. The others called her crazy when she came back to the car, but they wanted to hear her story. What did she feel? Did she feel like she was magic or made foreign from the alien? Tonight, her first feeling was that she had gotten more than she had bargained for. When Blake was snagged away in such an unimaginable and horrific way, it scared the shit out of her. But it also woke up the orb inside her heart. Memories can bring weakness or conjure internal strength. Tonight, she chose strength. She would live. She had taken action to see to it. She also wouldn't give up on adventure. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, makes you hunger for more. She kept a steady pace down the eerie, lonesome road. Danny kept her roving light beam changing the unknown darkness into brightly lit objects with deep shadows behind as her courage grew in strength. Her fear became intrigue. The unknown was morphing into the desire to conquer. She wouldn't be found cowering in a tree or crying for help under a porch any longer. Never again would she hide in those shadows that she would no longer retreat to.
I am strength. I alone am a survivor of all. I'll not surrender until the last drop of my blood is spilled on the soil below me, and then I'll empty my weapon as I fall to my knees.
These were the internal thoughts that battled and defeated the ones that would have her crumble helplessly and concede to cowardice. Chapter 10. Reborn. Danny's New Perspective. They say when one's spirit is reborn, a sharp burning sensation is felt deep within. Well, one can only imagine the inferno raging inside Danny's heart and soul at this moment. Her mind had been bombarded from every direction, from the thrill of adventure to the horror of watching the man she loved disappear before her eyes. He had been stolen from her in the most violent of ways. She ran the gamut of emotion, and everything in between had either tickled or stabbed at her psyche in the last several hours. Betrayal, fear, question, love, death. Danny's insides were too deeply scarred to ever allow her to forget tonight. Her inner mind was battling her beliefs and self-worth. Her consciousness had either ignored or was simply oblivious to these thoughts before. She was far too tortured and controlled by what she had witnessed and experienced to fully comprehend what was happening. Danny struggled to think clearly, but she suddenly felt that whatever that spook light was she had witnessed 9 years ago had always laid dormant, nestled deep into hibernation within her being. But now it had been awoken, possibly by the ravenous fear she had absorbed tonight. She felt like this unknown life force, if that was what it was, now gave her the power to take control of her previously unrevealed destiny. Her future would no longer be lost to chance by the toss of the dice. She was not only in control over that voracious fear within, but she had taken total control of it. She was now fully alive and transformed into a new being of sorts, like a superhero. She had somehow leveled up in the game of life.
I'm reborn. I feel the power and strength of 100 seasoned warriors have been awoken inside of me,
she said to herself. Her words were spoken aloud, as if to internally bang the drums of victory with the thunder she felt. She was anything but drunk with the placebo of courage. Instead, she became the entire meaning of the word courage. Danny now knew she could face any battle without retreat. Her heart pounded harder at the mere thought, pumping faster, as if it was what drove the raging grandeur now searing through her veins. Danny turned to take notice of the position the flickering lights held. Had the zombies been foolish enough to follow her still? Yes, they were still trailing. She drew a breath and placed her hand holding the mag light close to her chest. Nestled next to her heart, its beam brightened. It was a sign from God. No one would ever believe her story, and she felt a searing heat like Joan of Arc must have endured at the stake. This would be a tale to carry silently within. Any slip of the tongue about tonight, and the world beyond would sedate her with Thorazine and lock her away in a padded room for fear she was too dangerous, to herself or to them. She pointed the light beam in the direction she had turned, facing her pursuers. Danny felt a pop within her chest, much like the sound produced when the release of pressure from removing the lid off a jar containing preserved fruit. What followed was unexplainable. That orb from so many years ago popped from her chest and began dancing down the darkened road, much like the old farm road it had first appeared on. Its core spun in beautiful endless circles of twisted beams of colored light. The sphere moved like a beacon in front of her, guiding the path toward the battle she would now meet head-on. Danny's heart pumped harder, deeper, and more rhythmic than she had ever noticed before. Her chest pounded with every bounce of that orb as it danced before her eyes, and in an instant she knew what it was communicating to her.
Kill your fears tonight. Slay the mutant zombies with vengeance.
Danny spoke the words aloud as if responding in unison to a collective voice of an army. An overwhelming smile spread across her face, reaching her eyes. She knew what she was destined to do. Danny then spoke 5 simple words before she began marching forward, following the lead of the shining globe toward the enemy and the field where combat was about to take place.
This is for us, Blake.
Chapter 11. The Final Conflict. The line of black silhouettes toting their lit torches of taunting flames began to close in. As Danny and the enemy drew nearer to one another, their line began to tighten. Outer black mutant combatants began moving closer to the center as if they knew they were preparing to battle an army of only one. She tried to count the dark shadows and concluded there were at least 20, maybe more. The night was still too dark to be certain, even though the sun was on the cusp of showing its face. It seemed as if the Earth's ball of light wanted to rise early enough to witness the event about to take place. The backpack on her shoulder dropped to the ground as she stood close enough to see the red gleam in their eyes. When the beam of light crossed the first target's shiny slits, she noticed it reacted as if it had burned, but its pain became instantly nullified when she fired her first aggressive round into its head. The .45 caliber ACP round caused a small explosion of reddish mist, filling the air around it. The unfortunate recipient became the first casualty of war and tumbled forward into the dark, shadowy ground. No reason not to throw the first proverbial punch, Danny thought, as she squeezed a second round, which traveled quickly and penetrated the head of the shadow next to the first fallen dark fucker. Another explosion of zombie brain matter erupted from the side of its face before it too toppled to the ground, tripping the next one. Loud cracks were followed by more liquid blowouts as bodies fell to the now blood-soaked ground. Danny began to methodically move the muzzle of her weapon down the line, striking one after the other in its head and onto the next, like shooting ducks lined up in a pond, working back and forth from left to right and then reversing. It was as if she couldn't miss, each round finding its target and popping skulls like dime store balloons, splattering bright red crimson confetti, raining down its wetness all around her. The closer she came to the enemy, the stronger the stench of toxic rot became, quickly overtaking the air. The cloud hovering overhead caused Danny's eyes to sting, but she remained vigilant to inner assault, never ceasing a second from pulling the trigger. The black faceless goons continued to fall against each other, spilling their bloody goo before stumbling clumsily to the ground. She hadn't counted her shots, but instinctively dropped the mag light, now close enough to see without it, spontaneously drawing another magazine of rounds from her pocket. Before the handgun clicked empty and the receiver hung open, she ejected the nearly spent magazine, leaving one in the chamber, and quickly inserted the next, never missing the rhythm of a missed round and another dropped mutant. The orb continued to bounce across the battlefield as if it were directing the scene like a band leader would conduct his orchestra, enjoying every deadly kill as if it were a spectacular note hit in perfection. As she turned to continue playing her instrument, the odor became stronger of spent powder and rotting death, giving the incentive to finish the masterpiece even quicker. She upped the speed of the tempo's aggression, killing zombies at even a faster rate, driving the finish of the concert toward a quickened end with gusto. In one stroke of motion, she again reloaded as fluidly as a violinist draws a sweet note with their horsehair bow being pulled across the strings. The scene was horrific and beautiful at the same time. Danny knew Blake and her father would be proud of her performance, somehow wishing they were both in heaven's balcony, watching her virtuoso from box seats. The time went by in slow motion to her, but the finale ended as the last round in the Glock left its barrel and entered the final aggressor's head, sending him bobbling to the ground in a drum roll. The Glock's slide now hanging open in her hand as she readied herself to take a bow. As if called back for an encore, a head slowly lifted from the battlefield, and Danny walked over, reaching for the second weapon from her waist and lowering its muzzle to the enemy's dark, moist face. The sound of a quick double tap ended the show with a spray of black splatter, reddening Danny's soiled white tank top. A single bead of sweat rolled down to the tip of Danny's nose before plunging off in a swan dive and onto the smoldering battlefield to a sizzle. It was done. Her concerto was complete. She stood and surveyed the grounds with pride and swore there was a light applause from two spectators from up above. The sun peeked out with a slight hint of its light as Danny continued down the lone road toward home. She didn't know where or how long her walk would take her as the morning began to quietly whisper its entrance. She noticed a faded black iron entryway and gate up ahead with various sized headstones in mixed subtle colors rising from the ground below. It was the cemetery. She and Blake had somehow driven past it without taking notice as they had hurried, filled with the excitement of arriving at Helltown early last evening. A lot had happened since then. A lifetime in a mere single night. Walking past the gate, Danny glanced over, and sure enough, there was the old man apparition wandering around the cemetery as legend was written, walking with no apparent cause, barely visible in its hazy silhouette. It wasn't fear that drew her hand to the butt of the gun tucked back neatly in her waistband behind her. She had conquered that old adversary. It was a new instinct, memory muscle, a habit she wasn't even aware she had obtained. Danny watched the old ghost moving around with inconsistency as if he were looking for something he had lost. maybe a spouse or good friend. That's when she noticed her orb bouncing around within the stone monument. Had it found its home too? She stopped for a moment, and as the sun crested the horizon, bringing light and color to the world once again, she instantly heard the now familiar pop sound. As the orb touched the apparition while it was almost seated on a bench, they both vanished at once, just before a single beam of the sun's light could bridge a connection with them. In that nanosecond of an instant, Danny knew her dark adventure had drawn to a close. A feeling of complete calm fell over her, and an extreme sense of accomplishment brought any sense of fear and snuffed it out like wind to the candle's flame. Whoosh. The sound of a motor hummed in the distance, and Danny stood near the cemetery's entrance as a vehicle of some sort made its way over several slight inclines, peeking its head over the top briefly as it broached the peak, and then disappearing again as it recessed into a valley until the next hill, blurred from afar but gaining clarity as it came closer. The small bus finally crested the last rise in the road, but then slowed to a snail's pace as it cautiously drove past. 5 or 6 sets of eyes filled with inquisitive but hesitant apprehension peered through the slightly tinted windows. As the passenger van eased on by, Danny couldn't believe what she saw emblazoned on its white side panel as it passed. The words did, however, bring another huge smile to her face as she read them, feeling a small sense of connection to her fiancé. If you're ever Helltown bound, come ride in air-conditioned comfort and ghoulish style. Brought to you by Blake Evans Dark Tourism Adventure Bus Incorporated. You'll just die if you miss it. 740 Snakes Suck. SNAXSUK. 762-9785.
Chilling tales for dark nights.